Chapter 17 of The House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Signor is astonished. Madeline, still tremulous, turning, looked at the Italian, without for the moment quite realizing who he was or what he said. He, on his part, was in the usual excitable condition it seemed it was his wont to be. His words stumbled over each other in their haste to be uttered. "It is good that I find you. Very good. Most excellent. More. It is about time. I looked for you everywhere, up and down, all over the place. You are nowhere. Oh, no, there's nothing to be seen of you. Not a thing. Until now, just when I am going what you call stark, staring, raving mad." He appeared to be in a state of singular agitation. His big black eyebrows went up and down. His eyes rolled. His head twirled about on his shoulders. His whole body was in continual movement, as if it had been hung on springs. His volubility added to Madeline's bewilderment. She allowed him to grip her wrist and to lead her through an open door into a room which she had a misty consciousness was littered with all sorts of odds and ends without offering the faintest remonstrance. It was his own apartment, the one in which Mr. Lazarus had illustrated in such an uncomfortable manner what he called odic force. The Signor banged the door behind him. Madeline sank limply onto a chair on which there already was a pile of music, whereon Bianchi, crossing his arms upon his chest, stood in front of her in an attitude which suggested fury rather than grace. He showed an inclination to indulge in vain repetitions. "So it is you, at last. As I've said, there is now an opportunity for you to explain what you mean by treating me with such monstrous cruelty. Me, whose soul is all tenderness, who would not hurt a fly. You will now be able to make me understand what is the meaning on your lips of deceit, falsehood, ingratitude, black-hearted treachery, to let me know if you are indeed a woman or a thing of horror. I wait for you to tell me these things as you see. I am at your service. I attend only your convenience." Madeline's only response was to rise from her chair. Her manner was as cold as his was very much the reverse. "Be so good as to let me go." Springing to the door, he prevented its being opened by placing his back against it. "Never, never, I give you my word, until you have told me all that I have a right to demand. We shall understand each other altogether at last, I promise you, before you leave this room." He waved his hands in the air as he was speaking, as if he were doing his best to shake them off his wrists. Madeline, momentarily regaining more and more of her composure, began to eye him as if he was some sort of curiosity. "You are making a mistake." Off went his hands again, waggling in the air. They seemed to be in constant danger of dislocation. "It is a mistake I make, no doubt. It is not the first, but I swear to you that it shall be the last. There shall be no more mistakes between us two. I I command you, therefore, to tell me why you have played with me, the fool, why you've lied to me as if you were a thing of infamy, to tell me now at once." Madeline reflected. It occurred to her as being at least within the range of probability that this man had had something to do with Maud Dorincourt's crime. It was even possible that it was he who had been the direct incentive, that he had actually urged her to the act. She resolved to commence to break through the tangled web of misconception in which she had become ravelled, by giving him clearly to understand who and what she was. "The mistake you make is in supposing me to be Miss Dorincourt." The words were clearly uttered, yet that they conveyed no meaning to his mind seemed evident. He stood staring at her with knitted brows, as if she had addressed him in an unknown tongue. "What is that you say?" "I say that the mistake you make is in supposing me to be Miss Dorincourt. I am not. I'm no connection of hers. I'm a stranger to her. She had never heard of me, nor had I heard of her till yesterday. I am Madeline Orme." The musician's brows still were knitted, as if he was struggling with some knotty point, the solution of which was beyond his mental capacity. Then moving quickly towards her, putting his hand upon her arm, he said, with a degree of earnestness which placed his sincerity beyond all question, "What a liar you are! What a liar! Or," as a doubt seemed to cross his mind, "is it that you are mad?" Madeline smiled faintly in spite of herself. The little man's bluntness, coming so clearly from his heart, seemed to appeal to her sense of humour. "I'm not a liar on this occasion, nor am I mad. I almost wish sometimes that I were. It is the simple fact that I'm not Miss Dorincourt. Look at me closely. Do you mean to say that you cannot see for yourself that I am not?" He did as she bade him, thrusting his face within 6 inches of hers, searching her features with eager, yearning, staring eyes. "What new lie is it that you tell me, Maud? Why do you tell me such a lie? You must be mad. Can you not see that I'm not she whom you call Maud?" He made a hurried movement backwards, sweeping his hand before his eyes, as if to brush away some threatening illusion. "It is impossible. It cannot be. It is not a thing to be believed. If you are not Maud, who are you then?" "I am Madeline Orme." "Madeline Orme? Who is Madeline Orme?" "Nothing and no one. A creature picked out of the gutter to play the part of great lady for a day." "I do not know what you mean. What you say is beyond my understanding. It is a new game you play with me, Maud." He flung his arms above his head with a frantic gesture of appeal. "I cry to you out of my soul for mercy. I ask you to remember how often I have told you the story of my love, with what willingness you have listened to me, and all that you have promised. I ask you not to forget." Madeline interrupted him. "Don't you think it is unwise to talk in this strain to a perfect stranger?" "A perfect stranger? You dare to call yourself a perfect stranger? Maud, is it possible that you are such a one that you will even deny that you are yourself?" "My good man, I tell you that I am not Maud, and it seems to me that you can scarcely have such an intimate acquaintance with the lady as you pretend if you are unable to discover that fact for yourself. A man who knows a woman as well as you would have me believe that you know Miss Dorincourt is surely able to detect the imitation from the real." He went 3 or 4 steps backward, as if to be able to observe her from a more advantageous point of view. By degrees, as he continued to stare, there seemed to enter into his mind the beginnings of doubt. "I do not believe you are Maud. I do not believe it. She would not speak to me. She would not look at me like that. And yet you are Maud. You must be Maud. It is another game you play with me. It is altogether impossible that two persons can be so like each other." It is one of those impossibilities which have an inconvenient knack of translating themselves into facts. The thing's a freak of nature, nothing more. Providence has seen fit to make me, in externals, so like Miss Dorincourt that even to me the resemblance seems incredible. You must know that it's almost as much a novelty to me as it is to you. I'm still in a state of continual surprise. But if what you say is true, and you are—who do you say you are? I am Madeline Orme, who is no one in particular. Where then is Maud? Madeline considered, and decided that on the whole it might be more prudent to leave the question open. "I'm not Miss Dorincourt's keeper." "So, and you? What is it that you do here?" "I have been pretending to be Miss Dorincourt." "You have been pretending to be Miss Dorincourt? In the name of heaven, since when have you been pretending? It is a funny way in which you put it, to be Miss Dorincourt. I'm beginning to think I dream." "On the contrary, you are just commencing to awake. I've been playing at being the lady in question since yesterday." "Since yesterday?" Bianchi gave a dramatic start. In an instant every part of his body seemed to be in simultaneous movement. "Is it possible? Can it be that it was you who this morning engaged yourself to marry the Earl of Staines?" The young lady's countenance went a shade paler. "It is quite possible." "It was not her?" "It was not her." "Holy Virgin! It is incredible, a thing not to be believed. And he, the Earl, he thought you were Maud?" "There is reason to suppose it." The girl's tone was dry. "All the company of saints! Was ever such a comedy? What a creature you must be! What a woman to play such a trick before all that crowd of people! I must be an absolutely shameless person, mustn't I?" 2 bright red spots were burning on Madeline's cheeks. The musician's ingenious outspokenness stung her nearly to madness. "It is not only that, but what a boldness, what a courage, what a boundless impudence." "Yes, all that, indeed. I've seen something of women, of curious women, you may take my word for it, but you are altogether beyond them all, altogether. My gracious, my gracious!" He struck his temples 2 or 3 times smartly with his open palms. "It is a veritable comedy. You are like one of the valets of Molière." "I thank you. I trust they were agreeable persons. They are the most impudent rascals the wit of man ever conceived, the most barefaced." "I thank you still more." She dropped him a curtsy, her face flaming. "That is, if you are not Maud, of which I have still a doubt." "You need have none. On that point you may take my word." "Then it is a marvel, a true miracle, that the good God should have made two persons so like each other. But what a burden you lift off my heart, what a weight, and what a wrong I have done to my dear Maud in my thoughts. But how was I to know there were two of you? No one had spoken a word to me, not a hint. How was I to know it was you and not she? You would have deceived the devil himself. But now that once more my heart is alive, my soul revives." What a rapture to think that after all she is the angel, the true angel I have from the first supposed her. And after you had engaged yourself to the earl, you came in here to Lazarus and to me? Pardon me, but I did not. He spun round on his heels. What do you mean? I'm merely replying to your inquiry. I say that you came in here to Lazarus and to me, and I say again that I did not. Who was it then? That I cannot tell you, unless it was Miss Dorincourt. Miss Dorincourt? Miss Dorincourt? His jaw dropped open. The muscles of his face began to twitch. Suddenly rushing at her, he threatened her with his clenched fists. Do not dare to say it was Miss Dorincourt. It's a lie, a lie, a lie. It was you. You are all lies. She made a little movement with her hands. Possibly, but on this occasion I happen to be speaking the truth. Swear to me it was not you. This is the first time I was ever in this room. He looked at her long and fixedly. Something which he saw in her face seemed to drive the light all out of his. His hands fell to his sides. Staggering back, he stumbled over a chair. Sinking onto the seat, his head dropped forward onto his chest. In a moment he had become a picture of dejection. His voice was sepulchral. "My God, my God, my God!" he groaned. "We are undone altogether, she and I, and it is you who have done it. It is all you. You are a wicked, wicked, wicked woman. Granting the general proposition, how do you propose to make it out in this particular instance? I supposed, as all the world supposed, that it was she who had promised herself unto the earl, that she had foully betrayed me. Was I not a witness with my own eyes? I was beside myself with rage. I exclaimed that I would have his life and hers. Lazarus took me at my word. When she came in here, he said to me, I will arrange for you a perfect revenge. I will put it in her heart to kill him with her own hand, to kill him with a knife. I was not unwilling, for I believed that she had betrayed me at first. Go on." The girl had woke to sudden interest. She had advanced a step or two closer to him, and was exhorting him to continue with voice and gesture. He had paused. He was covering his face with his hands. After all, she had come to me with a hard-all truth, and he cast on her the evil eye. Who did? Lazarus. What do you mean by the evil eye? He looked up at her with glowering eyes. You ask me such a question, you who have cast the evil eye on all of us? Never mind me. Go on with what you were saying. Who is this Lazarus? He is my friend, or rather he was my friend. He is now my greatest enemy. When I see him, I will not answer for myself. He is a witch, a wizard, I know not what you call it. He cast on her a spell. He declared to me that he would put it into her heart to kill the earl. He was as good as his word. She was as wax in his hands, as wax. I saw it with my eyes. If she were to find the earl, which the saints forbid, I believe that she would thrust in him a knife because of what Lazarus put into her heart. Madeline's heart died down within her. Heavy weights seemed to be dragging at her limbs. For some moments she was speechless. She began to have an inkling of what it was that had really happened, to realize the position in all its horror. She has found the earl. Her voice had all at once grown hoarse. Its hoarseness seemed to affect Bianchi's as he half rose from his chair, as if involuntarily, in obedience to some volition other than his own. His huskiness seemed to be a sort of mockery. She has found him, and she has thrust in him a knife. As with an apparent effort of will, the man grasped her meaning. His face became transfigured. It was as if he had been attacked by trismus. The muscles of his jaw and throat became rigid, locked. It was dreadful to see him. His features were set in an awful grin. When his jaw did move, it was convulsively. Words came from him in choking gasps. It was difficult to make out what he said. My God, my God, my God! After his triple appeal to the deity, he was still. The man and the woman, barely a couple of feet apart, stood and eyed each other. She, seeing something in his tortured face which cut her to the soul, in some indescribable way, She seemed to grow smaller, to wither, as she perceived less and less dimly what a wholly helpless instrument Maud had been in the hands of a master of evil. Phantoms came crowding into her brain. She began to tremble. Do you mean to say that she didn't know what she was doing? She knew nothing. It was Lazarus who did it all. They spoke to each other in scarcely audible whispers, as if their voices had become worn to threads. But how could he do it if he was not there? It was the evil eye. Holy Virgin, deliver us from evil. He crossed himself spasmodically. It was as though some exterior force rebelled against his desire to describe on his breast the holy symbol. She watched him all the time, ghosts chasing each other through her brain, each conjuring up a separate image of dread. She thought of her recent interview with Maud, how she had showered on her head a whole arsenal of insult. She had accused her of being guilty of all the crimes in the calendar, steeped to the neck in the slough of iniquity. In the light of what the Italian had said, she perceived with what superlative good temper the girl had endured the shower of calumny, how hideously she had been ill-used. Madeline went hot and cold, red and white, as she contemplated the part which she herself had taken in that ill-usage. If only the ground would have opened to swallow her up! If only she could have fled somewhere to hide herself forever from the sight of men and women! If only she could have performed some impossible feat of expiation, wiped out with a wet rag the last 24 hours from the tale of her life! The pair continued to stare at each other, motionless as if they had been turned into stone. By degrees a mastering emotion began to grow up in Madeline's breast. It gathered force, became a frenzied desire to cleanse her soul at any cost from the reeking mass of deception amid which, as it seemed to her, it wallowed; to lift her head out of the depths into which she had allowed herself to sink, to become once more worthy of at least her own respect. If she only could do that, she felt that God might be once more with her, but until then, never. She stretched out her hand a little way towards her companion, tentatively, as if still in doubt as to what she ought to do or say, and she began to speak in a voice which, at first tremulous, uncertain, gained strength as she went on, until at last her tones rang through the room like trumpet notes. "It's all my doing, all mine. How great a fire! A little spark is kindled, because I was weak and suffered my better judgment to be overruled, pretending that I was yielding to the promptings of a spirit of adventure. During the flight of only a few hours all this has come. How worse than foolish I have been! What a wicked wanton! Yesterday I could have told myself that though the world had pressed upon me pretty hardly, and so it has, I had done nothing of which I need have cause to be ashamed. And now, where's all my boasting now? I have plunged head foremost into a carnival of shame, smirched myself from top to toe, lost all those things which I held so dear. I've been like a spark dropped into a powder barrel, which in its explosion scars every one in reach. There is not one of you I have not brought with myself to open shame." Drawing herself straight up, holding out her arms in front of her, she broke into a strain of passionate intensity. The Italian, his head held a little forward, stared at her with shining eyes, as if he found in her half-hysteric utterances some esoteric fascination. "What is done cannot be undone. The past is past. It has become written in the book of God, from whose pages nothing shall ever be erased. But I can stop the doing, and I will this instant, if God will only help me. I will confess my sin, if He will only give me strength. Yes, before them all, take off the borrowed clothing in which I have dared to stand, and show myself to be the creature of rags and tatters, which indeed I am. They shall know me as the wretch who has crept into the house like a sneak and thief, with perjuries upon my lips, hypocrisy in the very air she breathes, brazen-faced, yet a coward every inch of her." In an ecstasy of emotional exultation, clasping her hands, she seemed to be appealing to an unseen presence. "Give me strength, O God, for thou knowest how much I stand in need of it. Hard is the task which is before me. Without thy help I fear to fail. By the waters of bitterness my feet are faltering. Lead thou them in, for only by passing through the depths shall I reach safety, a quiet conscience, thy peace upon the further side." She was silent, yet continued for some seconds in the same attitude of rapturous supplication. Then her hands dropped to her sides, and with her head held well aloft, turning, without speaking another word, she passed from the room. Bianchi made not the slightest effort to detain her. But scarcely had she closed the door behind her Then without, on the very threshold, she was stayed by a tall, thin gentleman who held himself to the full as erect as she did, and who glanced at her from under nearly closed eyelids. As he glanced at her he smiled, and from the gentleman, his glance and his smile, she instinctively shrunk back. It was Mr. Lazarus. The sight of him seemed to fill the girl with an odd sense of repulsion. She stood as close as possible against the wall, as if to avoid any risk of even her garments coming in contact with his person. She seemed to be waiting for him to move aside so as to give her room to pass. But so far from moving, he not only remained stock still, he addressed her in a voice which grated on her nerves, even as his presence did. "My beautiful, so it is you, my songbird in whose throat the music is all frozen. Ah!" The ejaculation accompanied a movement of his eyelids which startled her, revealing as it did what a truly astonishing pair of orbs had been concealed behind them. She put up her hand as if to shield herself from their glare. "How dare you speak to me in such a way? Who are you? Let me pass." His eyelids had reverted to their original position. He was peering at her from beneath their rims in a fashion which suggested that, for some cause or other, he had been a little taken by surprise. "You have forgotten me already? That is strange. It is not often that I am so soon forgotten by my lady friends." The last words were uttered with a leer which made the blood boil in Madeline's veins. "Did you not hear me ask you to let me pass? Stand aside, sir." He showed no sign of doing as she desired, but continued to smile and look at her, as if he were examining her with a certain curiosity which was peculiarly his own. "You are in a great hurry. Why, all at once? Life in itself is such a rapid thing that it is a mistake for any one to hurry. Go slow, my dear, go slow. What is the matter with you now?" The matter was that Madeline appeared to have resolved to ignore his advice, and to get away from him as quickly as she possibly could. At once his manner changed. Opening his eyes to their widest, he fixed on her a demoniacal glare, extending his hand towards her with a gesture of imperious command. "Wait, I tell you to wait." The spectacle which she presented was horrible, looking like some obscene creature possessed of unholy powers. The girl shrank back against the wall, seeming for an instant as if she would succumb to his baneful influence. But in that direction, at any rate, she was stronger than he supposed. On a sudden, overtaken, as it seemed, by a paroxysm of uncontrollable rage, she sprang forward, positively leaping at him like some wild creature, striking him with one hand after the other on either cheek, well-delivered, resounding blows. In the first flush of his surprise he started back. Before he could recover himself, she had rushed past him and darted round the corner out of sight. His countenance, as he continued to stare in the direction in which she had disappeared, was a study of varying emotions. For an appreciable space of time it was distorted like a maniac's. No one who had seen him then would have denied that there was madness in his blood. By slow degrees it became, so to speak, smoothed out, until at last it returned to its normal condition of nearly shut eyes and perpetual smile. "What is the matter with me? Is it possible that I begin to lose my power, or have I caught her in an antagonistic mood? I don't like it. It's not nice for me. A short while ago she was so pliable. I had but to look at her. It was done. She was as easy to deal with as any one could be. Now already what a change! To have run away, to have slapped my face. No, it is not nice for me. When I see her the next time I will try again. Then perhaps it will be bad for her." As he said this he unceasingly smiled and walked towards the music room. Now he had reached it, he turned the handle of the door. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of The House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Maud sings to Mr. Lazarus. He opened the door a few inches and then stopped. Through the aperture there came the sound of a woman's voice. Maud was singing. As the first notes reached his ears, another change came over his face. The seemingly fixed smile faded. His brow was puckered. Something in his attitude suggested the animal which has been startled through its sense of hearing. Every nerve seemed strained, lest through want of vigilance a sound escaped him. His whole attitude denoted the most complete surprise, a surprise which, as he stood and listened, increased rather than diminished. The song which was being sung within approached its close. As the cadences swelled, denoting a capacity of voice and mastery of method as great as unusual, he seemed to hold his breath, lest even his very respirations should mar the perfect harmony. The singer ceased, and as she did so he drew a long, deep breath as if of satisfaction. The strained expression passed from his face. The smile returned, more strongly defined. What a voice! What a voice! What a voice! The repetition of the phrase and the fashion of its repetition, rising in a crescendo scale, was more expressive than would have been a plethora of words. It signified the alpha and the omega of his entire appreciation. Is this Bianchi's nightingale? But how came she in there? She did not go this way. It is not a moment since she went in the opposite direction. She must have some magic beside her voice to have got back again so soon without my knowing. Let me consider. I think the other door, which leads into the gallery, is up this way. He pointed with his finger. Can she have gone round into the room that way? It is impossible, unless she is a magician. I think I will go through that door myself. If I go through here, she would see me. She might sing no more, and that would be a pity, a great pity. Perhaps I can get through the other door without her seeing me, and then maybe I will prepare for her a small surprise. He moved in the direction towards which he had pointed, treading on the ball of his foot as cautiously as if an audible footfall would have brought discovery of his presence, and as if discovery was, beyond all others, the thing to be avoided. Turning to the left, mounting a short flight of stairs, he reached a second door. This he undid gingerly, just wide enough to enable him to thrust a part of his head inside. Ah, the nightingale again! Maud had recommenced to sing. He remained for a second or two, perfectly quiescent, with something of the same look of surprise on his face which had marked it before. She sings so with her whole soul that she will not hear me if I venture to intrude, and she has not eyes at the back of her head. Softly he insinuated his long, thin frame through the hardly opened door, so softly that the singer could certainly not have been made conscious of his entrance by the slightest sound. She stood immediately in front of the organ, somewhat to the right, and in advance of where he was, so that he saw her side face from behind. There was again something distinctly reminiscent of an animal in the manner in which he observed her. He might have been compared to one of the great carnivora watching a possible meal, whose appetite, already keen, was becoming whetted more and more by what it perceived and heard, and whose instinct warned it to take every precaution against a premature disturbance of its prey. The girl was singing some florid air of Donizetti's, one which the musical taste of the moment has elected to call old-fashioned, but one forgot the caprice of the critics, or even one's own predilections, as one listened to the singer. One felt that all must be music which issued from that throat, that the commonplace would be glorified and the meretricious made entrancing. The single auditor made his own comments. Power? There is power enough to fill Hyde Park and to spare. Quality? It is like an orchestra of violins, all played by masters. Range? Heaven knows how many octaves. I should say all the gamut. Bianchi did not exaggerate. No, he was underneath the truth. What would such a voice be worth to whoever had it? Just then the singer stopped. Glancing carelessly about her, she caught sight of him behind. Who are you? What are you doing there? He bent himself almost double. I beg from you 10,000 pardons for venturing to listen to the choirs of the angels, to the music of the spheres. I did not guess your gift of melody when seeing you just now. She glanced at him with knitted brows, as if making an effort at recognition. Seeing you just now? What do you mean? When you did me the honor to, he imitated the action of slapping his cheeks. Have you forgotten already? Again, it seems to me that you forget very soon. The girl was smiling. You think so? I think it is you who are making a mistake. Something in her intonation caught his ear. He drew himself up, moved hastily towards her, then stopped to stare from beneath his overhanging eyelids with new and singular intensity. Did I not have the pleasure of seeing you just now outside? You did not. I've not been out of this room for an hour or more. He seemed to be rigid all at once, with inexplicable emotion which she found it amusing to observe. I believe it is not. And yet, great heaven, have you a sister? Not to my knowledge. Then, have you a double? A double? Maud bit her lip. Why do you talk such nonsense? Pray, who are you that you should ask me such a question? He jumped off his feet, straight up into the air, snapping his fingers above his head with a noise like discharging pop-guns. It is a miracle, a miracle. I begin to understand, to catch a glimpse. But it is a true miracle. You are Miss Dorincourt. His antics seemed to cause the girl to be divided between entertainment and perplexity. I am. And it was you who came to see Bianchi and me. She put her hand up to her face. A spasm passed over her. I don't understand. Ah! He threw up his arms, as if to emphasize the long drawn-out guttural ejaculation. This is beautiful. Now I see it all. What fools we have been, Bianchi and I. It is your double who has done it. She is like you as two peas. The devil himself will not be able to tear you from each other when he has you both downstairs. She slapped me, your double. Well, perhaps in return I will slap you, so we shall be even. Maud drew herself a little back. You talk in an extraordinary strain, particularly considering that you are a perfect stranger. Be so good as to leave me at once. All in good time. There is no hurry. Move always gently. Perhaps I am not such a perfect stranger as you suppose. Think. Thrusting out his finger as a cat might suddenly protrude its claws, for an instant he opened his eyes to their fullest limits. Covering her face with her hands, she turned away and shivered. Don't go. Her distress caused him obvious satisfaction. Ah, I thought you would remember me, if you tried. It would break my heart to think that I was altogether forgotten by one so lovely. Do you hear me tell you to go away? I hear you, but I will not go. I'm not such a fool. Seating himself, crossing his legs, clasping his hands in front of him, he regarded her with head thrown back, as a connoisseur might a picture. I cannot tell you with what a pleasure I learn that it was not you who slapped me. I was afraid of a great many things. It is a big weight off my mind. Now we will have a little pleasant conversation together, you and I. You love Bianchi." The girl continued to shiver, keeping her back still turned to him. "How dare you ask me such a question?" "I ask it again. You love Bianchi?" "I will not answer you." "Oh, yes, you will. You will answer me that, and a great deal more. You will deliver yourself into my hands before I have done with you, body, soul, and spirit, to do with as I please. So do not be silly. In the meantime, you will make me cross. Tell me, you love Bianchi?" She was still. "So you choose to begin with a little rebelling. Well, only you must not let it go too far. Turn round to me." She gripped the ledge of the gallery with both her hands. "I won't." "Turn round to me." His voice was a little deeper. She bent over the edge, clutching it as if for her life. "I won't, I won't, I won't." "Turn round to me." He stretched out the long claw-like index finger of his right hand, and he opened his eyes. For some seconds there was silence. His hand remained rigid, his eyes open. Some unseen force seemed passing from him to her, which she was doing her utmost to resist. Her teeth were biting at her lower lip. She was doing it to retain control over the muscles of her face. Every nerve was strained to keep her body set and stiff. By degrees, however, her efforts at resistance became less strenuous, as if the continued strain had gone beyond her powers of endurance. The dogged, desperate look which was on her face relaxed. She began to sway to and fro, and at last, loosing her hold on the ledge, tremulously, uncertainly, as if she were giddy, she began to turn right round until she fronted her tormentor. She presented a pitiful enough spectacle as she stood there, with pale cheeks, twitching lips, downcast eyes, trembling like a reed shaken in the wind, but plainly it was not the pity of it which appealed to him. "Lift up your eyes and look me in the face." She hesitated. Then, with a sort of start, she did as he bade her. Her lovely eyes met his awful ones. Something passed from his to hers which seemed to cut into her soul and to dry up the springs of life which were within her. Something in her face seemed to drop, as if the expression had gone right out of it. The result seemed to afford him satisfaction. He allowed his eyelids to drop again, and his smile returned. "You see, after all, it is the same. You had better have been sensible at first, instead of giving me all this trouble. Not that it is trouble which I mind. No, not at all. To bring such a lovely creature into subjection is always amusing, and the more she rebels, the more it is amusing. So now that we have had this little pleasant struggle together, you and I, tell me, you love Bianchi?" There was a perceptible pause before she spoke. Then the words came with a little jerk. "Yes, I do." "Ah, lucky man! Much to be envied fellow, to be loved by so beautiful a young lady. You love him much?" Again there was the noticeable interval between the question and the answer, proving less noticeable as the questions were persisted in. "Yes." "With all your heart?" "With all my heart." "And all your soul?" "And all my soul." There is nothing you would not do for him? There is nothing I would not do for him. You would lay down your life for him? I would lay down my life for him. It was singular to note how, in her parrot-like repetition of his words, she invested her echo with a dignity which gave to the phrases, when they came from her lips, quite a different meaning to that which they bore when they proceeded from his. Despite the wooden mould in which her face seemed to have all at once become framed, she uttered her confessions with an air of sincerity which was not without its pathos, while he wrung them from her with a grin which was a crescendo sneer. "So you love him as much as that? Well, he is a happy man. And do you know what he loves? He loves your voice as much as you love him, my faith, perhaps more. And he has sense. It is not only that it is a golden voice, it is a diamond mine, with all the diamonds in full sight. You have only to hold out your hand. It is full of them. Even I could love such a voice as that, you see, even I. Let me have some more of it. Charm my eyes again with the sparkle of the diamonds, and my ears with the tinkle, tinkle as they fall. There is nothing I love like music, particularly when it comes from such a throat. Already I begin to feel something of Bianchi's rapture. What would one not dare to have such a voice to do with, as one would, even to marrying the case in which it is contained? Sing to me another song." She appeared to hesitate, to make a further puny, futile effort to withstand his malignant influence. "I would rather not." "What do I care if you would rather not? I say, sing to me another song. Do you hear me? Sing." Once more his eyes gaped. He pointed at her an insistent finger, and straightway she sang. Her arms dangled at her sides. She stood well up, her head a little back, staring unseeingly in front of her, and from her lips there poured forth a flood of song. Possibly in the midst of her state of complete subordination to this demoniac will, she was conscious of her overwhelming need of help. At any rate, it was as if she cried straight from her heart to God, "Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, while the gathering waters roll, while the tempest still is high." Probably this was not the kind of thing he had expected to hear, this wailing of a soul in agony, this heart-rending flight of song beating against the bars of heaven. However that might have been, it met with his entire approbation. It was a characteristic of this girl's singing that whatever she sang seemed to be just what she had been meant to sing. A more ideal rendering of the popular hymn could not have been conceived. Lifting it out of the rut of the commonplace, she made it worthy of the choirs of the angels. Long before she came to the close, and beyond the slightest doubt, when she reached the lines, "All my trust on thee is stayed, all my help from thee I bring, cover my defenseless head with the shadow of thy wing," had she been singing to a vast assemblage of people, 99 out of every 100 of her auditors would have been dissolved in tears, a fact which her audience of one did not fail to note. That is the sort of song to please the English people, and that is the way to sing it. It is a song of religion, the English religion, and it makes them cry. Those are the two things they like, religion and crying. We will pull out both the stops for them together, my dear? In France, in Germany, in Italy, they like something a little different. Yes, indeed, a good deal different. But for England, where there is the money, that is just the thing. And for America also. There they are as big fools as the English. Oh, yes. That song of yours is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. It would melt a heart of stone. See how it has melted mine. I'm all softness. You shall sing it again, and others like it, again and again for me, instead of for Bianchi. Why not? Can you not love me instead of him? Is it not easy? The girl drew herself together, as if desirous of compressing herself within the smallest possible compass. She shuddered. "Love you? You? No, no, no." He continued to smile contentedly. You see how the mere thought affects you. That is a sign that you are very near to loving me, so near it makes you shiver. It is the sweet flower of your innocence which closes its petals with a quiver which is half shame, half rapture. My beautiful, let me tell you who I am. That will be to make love in the proper orthodox way. My dear young lady, I earn my bread and sometimes also my cheese by introducing remarkable people to that great public which loves remarkable people all the world over, and which pays through the nose to see them. Sometimes it is a girl with two heads, or two girls with one head, which is better. Sometimes it is a charming creature who can kick as high as the moon, first with one leg, then with the other, then with both together. Sometimes it is a lady who can tie herself into 14 kinds of knots, but she does not last, that lady. She has disappointed me more than once. Sometimes it is a sweet young thing who can turn somersaults till to watch her makes you dizzy. But this time it will be a new departure. I will introduce a veritable artist indeed, the greatest singer the world has ever seen. It will not be necessary to announce it on the bills. You will advertise the fact yourself so soon as you open your beautiful mouth. And so that you may have the benefit of every possible advantage, I will introduce you as my wife. To begin with, I will marry you. What do you say? Is not the idea enchanting? It was not clear that the girl followed all he said with a definite perception of his meaning, but that she understood him at the close of her demeanor showed. Her face was ashen white. Her whole frame seemed filled with a sense of indescribable repulsion. She could but gasp. Marry you? Marry you? Yes, marry me. Is it not a thing of which to dream, eh, my flower? I will introduce you as Madame Lazarus. It is a good name, Lazarus, eh? You will charm the world and fill my pockets. We shall both of us be happy. In the wildest flights of your ambition you never supposed that you would become the wife of such a man as me. It is to go even beyond your dreams, is it not so? From her look of agony it seemed as if she were making a violent effort to free herself from the unseen bonds which held her as in a vice, and striving in vain. Let me go, let me go, let me go. Let you go? Never. To speak of such a thing is to be absurd. So far from letting you go, I will keep you with me forever, till you are dead, or as good as dead, I promise you. Only death, or its full equivalent, shall henceforward part us twain. With such a sudden passion have you inspired my breast. You have your gift, which shall be used for me, and I have my gift, which shall be used for you. This last was said with a grin, which drove his meaning home to her with a force which brought on another convulsive fit of shuddering. Rising from his chair, he began to pace backwards and forwards in front of the organ, eyeing her continually, sideways, as a cat might a mouse. Each time he passed her, even though it was at a distance of several feet, she quivered, as with a twinge of pain. Presently, as he continued to stride to and fro, putting the fingers of his right hand up to his mouth, he began to snap his nails against his teeth, making them ring out with a disagreeable click, click, click. As he did so, the door through which he had entered was opened furtively, some half a dozen inches, just as he himself had opened it, and somebody else peeped through. It was Signor Bianchi. Presently Lazarus broke into audible speech. Bianchi, as if he found himself unable to hear what was being said, opening the door a little wider, came into the gallery. Neither the girl nor the man observed him. Mr. Lazarus was altogether too much engrossed with the fruit of his own cogitations, too full of the pleasure of drawing his toils tighter and tighter round his helpless victim. Every now and then he threw out his hands towards her. Each time she started, as if he had struck her a blow. His tone became more and more menacing as he went on. You are a young lady of high birth. Your family is powerful, rich. To take you away, to hide you until I can make you my wife, and perhaps afterwards, that is not easy. It is only I who could do it, and even then, think of the danger I shall run. If they were to find you in my possession, would there not be trouble? To make the risk as little as may be, what I will do is this. You see, I tell you everything. I hide nothing, nothing at all. Why? Because it is my nature to be frank. Now you are a little under my influence. Soon you will be altogether. I will soak you in the ocean of my will. I will impregnate you with my own personality, absorb you in myself. There will be left to you no individuality, no separate existence, no instincts of your own. You will be like an automaton which will only work in response to the movements of a key. And the key? I shall be the key. I shall put my arm through yours, and I shall say, come, and you will come. I shall say, go, and you will go. And if anyone asks you where it is that you are going, you will reply, mind your own business, or what affair is it of yours, or whatever words I shall put into your head. So we will go out of the house and out into the world, arm in arm, together, indeed a thoroughly united pair. You devil! Had the average man found himself addressed in such terms unexpectedly from behind, in a voice husky with emotion, it is probable that he would have spun round like a top, with at any rate a view of learning what such an interruption might chance to mean. But it was characteristic of Mr. Lazarus, and of his strength of nerve, that for a distinct moment or two he allowed the interposition to go unnoticed. Then slowly turning, he saw, a few feet away from him, the musician, crouching as if he was about to spring, his face alive with passion, every nerve in his body seemingly on the twitter. Mr. Lazarus only smiled. Ah, it is you, my excellent friend Bianchi, indeed. How goes it, my good fellow? Bianchi hesitated, his eyes glaring at Lazarus, then looking yearningly at Maud. Dashing past his quondam friend, he rushed to the girl. Maud, Maud, he cried. He took her limp, nerveless hands in his. Emotion impeded his utterance, words strutting on each other's heels. I've done you a wrong, a great wrong. I've been told it all by Miss Madeline Orme. I beg from you 10,000 pardons. It was not you who promised to marry the Earl of Staines. It was she. Now I know. I entreat from you forgiveness. How shall I prove to you that I'm sorry? Speak to me, my darling. Tell me that you understand that the mistake was natural. Speak to me, I entreat you. Speak. The girl was silent. His impassioned supplication met with no response. Instead there came Mr. Lazarus's sardonic tones from behind. Why does she not speak to you, since you ask her with such warmth? I wonder. Bianchi, suffering the jibe to pass unheeded, renewed his hot appeal, as if by dint of sheer vehemence he could force words from between her lips. Speak to me, my sweet, my angel, my loved one. Do not care for him. He is nothing. If you will only try hard, you will be able to speak. For my sake, in the name of all that is good and holy, in the name of the Lord Christ and of his holy angels, I entreat you, my sweet one, my beloved, try, try, try. Not a sound proceeded from her lips. A gray look of agony was on her lovely features. Tiny beads of sweat stood on her brow. All that was audible was Mr. Lazarus's light-hearted mockery. Why does she not try? It is very cruel of her not to try when you ask her with so much eloquence. It is so strange, but you never can tell what it is that moves a woman's tongue. Bianchi seemed to hesitate, as if still waiting for her to speak. Then, as she continued silent, turning with an inarticulate cry of rage, he sprang at Lazarus like some mad thing. The onslaught was made with such violence that the big man, taken unawares, stumbling over a chair, went backwards onto the floor, the musician clinging to him as he fell, continuing to unceasingly attack him in a frenzy of unreasoning rage. For a second or two it seemed as if rage would supply Bianchi with strength enough to make the contest equal, but only for a time. The conditions were too uneven to allow of its enduring long. The very fury which lent the Italian force hastened his own undoing. He became exhausted. Lazarus rose slowly to his feet, holding him as if he had been a monkey in his huge hands. With one he compressed the windpipe, increasing the pressure as the writhing little man grew blacker and blacker in the face. Shall I choke the life out of you? Why not? It would make a proper evening, and to throttle you for me would be good sport. The wretched man's eyes were starting from his head. The horrid spectacle which he presented afforded his friend the liveliest satisfaction. The English law is an ass. It does not discriminate. No, to kill even such a thing as you, it calls murder. It is hardly worth one's while to commit such a crime for the sake of such a subject. He shook his victim till the wonder was that he did not shake him all to pieces. But I think I know another way which is equally efficient, which will make me as even with you as if I had killed you straight away. Picking up some sheets of music, Maud's music, squeezing them into a ball,
He crammed it into the Italian's mouth, driving it between his jaws as if it had been a wedge. That will make a pretty gag, a very pretty gag. Now it will be you who will not be able to speak, though you may try ever so hard. The next thing is a piece of string. Always carry a good piece of string. One never knows if one will not want it. You see at this moment how useful it is going to be." He took from a pocket a long piece of stout twine. This he proceeded to twist about Bianchi's body, turning him nonchalantly up and down and round, as if he were some huge doll, until he had drawn it about his limbs in such a dexterous coil that he was no longer even able to struggle. Placing the helpless little man upon the organ stool, and the stool before the keyboard, he began to fasten him with the twine to the stops on either side, until he had laced him up so tightly as to be incapable of speech or motion. "You will be quite comfortable there, my friend. If the string cuts you a little, you must not mind. It is meant to cut, you understand. If kind people are long before they come to unfasten you, it will cut right through your skin, especially if you fidget. I hope you will fidget, then you will bleed. It is true that you cannot speak or move, but you can see and hear. Now observe, look at the sweet young lady. Is she not sweet, eh? And listen." He turned to Maud. "You love our good friend Bianchi?" "Yes, I do." "You hear, my dear friend? Is not that a good hearing? Do you love him much?" "With all my heart." "You see, once more. Ah, Bianchi, how nice to be you. What would you do for him?" "I would lay down my life for him." Is it not rapture to hear a confession so frank from lips so lovely? Does not the blood dance in your veins? Thrice happy man! Yet the odd fact is, that though she says such things to you, it is me she is going to marry, and soon, without delay, at once. I give you my word. She is going to be my wife, my beautiful wife. Ah, how obedient my wife will be, and she will sing for me like the angels sing, and her songs will fill my pockets with money, which will fall out of the skies. You hear, Bianchi? It pleases you? Well, observe once more." Mr. Lazarus turned so that he stood immediately in front of Maud. He held himself straight, seeming suddenly to increase in stature. Throwing his arms above his head, he called out to her in a tone of command which rang through the room, "Look me in the face." Raising her eyes, she centered them on his, looked at him fixedly, as some dumb beast, shackled and helpless, might regard the butcher who stands before it with the pole-axe in his hand. Suddenly he swept impetuously forward with glaring eyes, his arms sweeping down towards her as he advanced. She seemed to collapse as his arms descended, until, when he reached her, there was nothing of her left but an inanimate heap upon the floor. Looking at Bianchi over his shoulder, he pointed to the inert mass. "You see, I do with her as I will, yet you must understand that I but begin. Wait till I have her to myself in my own place alone, till I am about to make of her my wife." He spurned her with the toe of his boot. Stooping, he touched her shoulder with the finger-tips of his right hand, raising his hand slowly, inch by inch. As he raised it, she came to, as if his fingers had been magnets through which a current was being sent strong enough to hold her fast. In this way he restored her to the perpendicular. As a conjuring trick it might have been effective, only one would have preferred to think that the invertebrate figure which had been subjected to such novel treatment had been that of an automaton. It was not nice to think it was the body of a living woman, and one so young, so gifted, and so beautiful. "Give me your arm." She passed her arm through his. "Come and be my wife." They moved together towards the door, Bianchi following them with bloodshot eyes. When they had gone a yard or two, Mr. Lazarus paused. "Do not let us forget what is proper to the occasion. It is true that Bianchi watches, but he does not count. He is no one. It is right that you should treat me as becomes a loving wife. Kiss me tenderly upon the lips." She kissed him. Bianchi shut his eyes. Lazarus laughed. "Now let us hasten and get married. We are both of us in such a hurry. There is not a moment to be lost." Arm in arm they passed from the room, Lazarus slamming the door behind him. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of The House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Confession. The Earl of Staines sat up in bed, propped at the back by pillows, though he scarcely seemed to need them. His naturally sallow complexion had taken to itself a sicklier hue. His features, always defined with sufficient clearness, now stood out more sharply than ever. His cheeks seemed to have fallen in. His whole face looked wasted and worn, as if he, on a sudden, had grown old. Yet one felt, as one observed, the undeniable change which, since his accident, had already taken place in his appearance, that it was probably owing more to mental causes than to physical. There was that in the lines which marked his forehead, and in the crow's feet which nestled in the deep hollows about his eyes, which told of mind troubles, stress and strain, of unwelcome thoughts which would not be denied. At his bedside was his grandmother, her chair drawn up so close to him that, sitting as she did with her head thrown forward, their faces were within a foot of one another. Despite the difference of years, the likeness between them was distinct. In particular, his eyes had that almost fantastic quality of penetrative vision which was characteristic of hers. Near the dowager was his mother, with whom he seemed to have no feature in common, either mental or physical. She, with her square, impassive wooden countenance, big, dim, owl-like eyes; he with the clear-cut physiognomy of a transcendentalist and dreamer, and eyes of mystery which, especially at that moment, seemed to be looking through time into eternity. In the background hovered Mrs. Singleton, fidgety, anxious, full of trouble, as if continually watching for something which she feared, yet knew must come. About the room were the abundant evidences of feminine occupation, the 1,001 knick-knacks of the young lady of fashion, the multitudinous adjuncts of the toilet, which are rather playthings than essentials, the reason for whose existence is a source of perpetual mystification to the average man. The Earl had just been saying something with an air which was intended to mean that that was his final decision, something which the dowager found not unfamiliar, yet which she half resented. She eyed him in silence after he had finished, as if she was trying to read in his face a meaning which was behind his words. "Is that your final decision?" "It is." "And you won't marry her?" "I will not." "You're going to throw her over, if you like to put it in that way." "And you're going to break the vow which you have vowed in the presence of a couple of hundred people, stultify yourself and me, and call down on your head the curse of God, which you yourself have challenged?" "As to the latter, not at all. That is only to fall on me if I take to myself another wife, which I shall not do. I shall remain unmarried." "And leave everything easy for Reginald?" He was silent. From the expression of his face one might judge that that consideration had no weight with him whatever. "And may I venture to ask why you have come to this decision, which is in direct opposition to that other decision at which you arrived only a few hours since, as I supposed finally?" "I do not propose, my dear grandmother, to weary you with details, but would merely observe that, having reconsidered the position, I perceive that marriage would bring satisfaction to neither of us. So there's the end." "So she did stab you?" The old woman's quietly uttered words struck home. It was probable that he had endeavoured to school his countenance to show no trace of whatever storm might rage within, but the quick thrust had taken him unawares. It had found a weak point. He winced. "I'm not feeling very well." "You're not looking very well." he was not. His eyes closed as if they had all at once grown tired. The furrows on his brow deepened. He tightened his lips. He looked like a man who was enduring an acute attack of sudden pain. Even his voice had changed. The cold self-possession with which he had been speaking seemed to have passed away. "I'm afraid I'm hardly fit to enter into disputatious matters. I sent for you somewhat against the doctor's wishes, because I was conscious of having arrived at a determination which I felt it my duty to communicate to you at the earliest possible moment. Now that I have done so, I'm afraid that I must beg you to excuse me. I begin to realize that the doctors were more in the right than I supposed." "Why did she stab you, Staines?" Again the lips twitched, the eyes still closed. Then, after a moment, the dark orbs opened, something saturnine seeming to be shining out of their depths. "Pray, on what grounds have you concluded that she did anything of the kind? Has she told you?" "Not she. On the contrary, she has sworn by all her gods she didn't." His eyes reclosed. When he opened them again, it was to say, in even measured tones, as if he was considering the meaning of each word as it passed his lips, "Since she has already made to you a statement, it only remains for me to endorse it." "You fool! Staines, you're an idiot." He only smiled. "You may laugh, but if you'd a grain of sense, you'd wait for your laughter till you win. I will say this for her, that she lies like truth, with 1,000 times better air than you. There's that in the business I don't understand, though you needn't trouble yourselves to cover it over with lies, because I don't want to understand. I'd as lief not. But you don't suppose that I'm going to have my life purpose put aside because you two have already begun to scratch each other? Don't think it. All these years you've been willing to marry her. Do you imagine that at the 11th hour I'll suffer you to kick? I've too good a grip of the reins, my lad, and the whip's too close to my hand. As for Maud Dorincourt, she's boggled at the business, I'll allow. But now she's been screwed up to the sticking point, or she's screwed herself. She's said she will marry you, and she shall." "She has never said so, never." Madeline was the speaker. She stood at the foot of the bed, appearing there, all in an instant, as it seemed, out of space, they knew not whence nor how. She was still all glowing with the haste of her flight from Lazarus, hot from her interview with Bianchi, tingling with shame at the thought of the injustice with which she had treated Maud. Her whole being was agitated by varying emotions which, raising her out of herself, caused her to be unconscious of all else but her eager desire to free her soul from the burden which weighed it down. Never had her beauty appeared to more advantage. Her cheeks glowed, her eyes flashed, every movement of her limbs or body was an added grace, while amazed, taken by surprise, they looked at her askance. She went on, in a voice clear as a bell. "You are under an entire misapprehension, completely and entirely mistaken, in supposing that Miss Dorincourt ever contemplated, even for an instant, the possibility of giving such a promise. She has done nothing of the kind. On the contrary, she has never wavered in her determination not to marry the Earl, or in her resolution not to hold out the faintest hope of her ever being able to do so. She has been afraid that you would put unfair pressure upon her, of a kind which she might find it hard to submit to, but though you used her never so cruelly, I am persuaded that she would rather die than yield. My lord, rest assured that Maud Dorincourt has never promised to marry you, and that she never will." She flung out her arms as she uttered these final words, as if they had been some sort of missile which she was hurling at his head. The earl, oblivious of the pillows which were supposed to act as a prop to his back, was leaning forward, staring at her across the length of the bed. The dowager, genuinely surprised, for once in her life, had screwed her ancient head round between her hunched-up shoulders and glared at her with astonished eyes. Is the girl stark mad, or does she imagine we are? I've been stark mad, but at last I have returned to my sober senses, that is all. The earl interposed. But surely I misunderstand you. Surely you promised you would marry me. I promised you. Yes, my lord, to my shame be it said. To your shame? Why to your shame? You pretended that you loved me. It was not pretense, my lord. No, it was not that. Again to my shame be it spoken. Who am I, that I should make you such a promise? I, a worthless, deceitful creature, without rank and fortune, scarcely, in the world's judgment, a fit mate for one of your serving men. Mrs. Singleton came bustling forward, all tremulous anxiety, touching her timorously on the arm. My dear, think before you speak. Don't be over hasty. Do be careful what you say. Madeline turned towards her austerely, like an offended queen, Mrs. Singleton shrinking before the reproach which her bearing conveyed. I will not be over hasty. I thank you, Mrs. Singleton, and I will be careful for the first time since I've had the pleasure of making your acquaintance. These are matters on which you yourself had better take advice. Had you not been over hasty, but much more careful things would not have been done, the shame of which nothing which you can do during the brief remainder of your life will erase. She gave the old woman a glance before which that worthy cowered, as if she had been made conscious as by a flash of lightning of the unseemly part which she had played. Madeline, turning from her, walked along the side of the bed towards the earl. Look at me, my lord. Something in her demeanour seemed to tickle the gentleman she addressed, though his mood was certainly not disposed to humour. I am looking. Look at me closely. I'm afraid if I am to look at you closer, you will have to lean towards me. I cannot come nearer to you, being forbidden by the faculty. Is it possible you cannot see I am a stranger? A stranger, Maud? You are star-gazing. In your judgment, is the woman whom a man has known and loved from his childhood still to him a stranger? My lord, it is not I whom you have loved, but I know better. I know that it is not only you whom I have loved, but that I love you more than ever I did, that while formerly my affection was of the platonic sort, of late, on a sudden, it has burst into a white-hot flame, so that at the sight of you I burn with a desire to take you in my arms and fold you to my breast. My lord, my lord! Trembling, she covered her face with her hands. My darling, do not cry, nor let yourself be troubled. For all that has happened, the fault is mine. In the first flush of my new and strange love, I had forgotten that you need not have changed because I had. Something in your words and manner, and even in your looks, my dear, I was so foolish as to misconstrue, and that was how the mischief has been done. But now that I perceive the crassness of my stupidity, do not think so badly of me as to suppose that I will allow an iota of my fault to rest on you. That would be to judge me even more harshly than I deserve. My lord, it is not I whom you have loved. Removing her hands from before her face, holding them out in front of her, the girl looked at him with streaming eyes. He met her glances unwaveringly, with, in his own eyes, something of that ecstasy of pain which is akin to rapture. That may be so, since you assert it, and after all, it is of little consequence, for certainly you are she whom I love now. She started back, her cheeks all red. You are mistaken. It is hardly a point on which a man is likely to be mistaken. It would be better, perhaps, for both of us, if it were otherwise. Then my every pulse would not be throbbing with the anguish of my desire to hold you in my arms. Is it possible that one face and form can be so like another that, even with the eyes of which you speak, you cannot tell the two apart? What do you mean? Is it possible that even now you cannot see that I am not Maud Dorincourt? Not Maud Dorincourt? Can you not see that I am not? The earl half rose in bed. His face was agitated by varying emotions, first bewilderment, surprise, then something which transfigured it so utterly that all in an instant the look of pain and stress and worry was lifted clean off it, as if it had been a mask, and at once he seemed and was twice the man that he had been before. He sank back to his former position with a long, gasping breath, as if dismissing from his breast all the humours which oppressed him. What a triple-plated idiot I am! Of course you are not Maud. That's the puzzle which all the time's perplexed me. What a purblind bat I've been! Come closer, let me look at you. Can you not see me where I am? Come closer. She went a little closer. Closer still. She obeyed. Give me your hands, my lord. Give me your hands. She did as he bade her, yielding her hands affrightedly, as if she dare not disobey. He held them in both of his, reading her face as if he loved to feast on it. No, you are not Maud. You are the woman whom I love. My lord, her voice was so low that it was not easy to catch her words. You are the woman who loves me. This time she was silent. Her head sank down. Drawing her to him, he put his arms about her. No, thank God, you are not Maud. He kissed her on the lips, and she was still. Lady Hildegard, striding round the bed, gripped the girl by the shoulder. Staines, let her go. I wish to speak to her. Her peculiarly strident tone suggested that her mental equilibrium was not in any way disturbed. The earl scarcely glanced at his mother. He spoke to the girl. It is I who have a right to call you to account, and I alone. I'm not altogether the weak being I've seemed to you. Do not be afraid. He loosed her. She stood up. I'm not afraid. She did not look as if she were. She met the oddly built great lady's stony glare, as if at any rate in that she saw nothing to fear. So you are an impostor. Reginald was right. His eyes are keener than mine. Yes, his eyes are keener than yours. Who are you? I'm Madeline Orme. Madeline? The earl held out his hand to her. That is a better name than Maud. Come with me, my girl. It is time that you and I should understand each other. Lady Hildegard gripped her left arm, but the earl, tightening his hold of her other hand, held her fast. You are right, mother. It is time that you should understand each other. But if you have no objection, you will understand each other in my presence. I would rather. My dear Staines, don't be a greater idiot than you have been already. I trust, my dear mother, that in all things I shall always be your son. Let her go. Why are you holding her hand? Because, God willing, and the lady, I hope to keep hold of it for ever. You must be stark mad. Don't you understand that the creature's a bare-faced impostor, that she's been guilty of playing a part which would be possible to none but the very lowest type of woman? For all you know, she may be the very scum of the earth, and probably she is. My dear mother, you know not of what you speak. And you rave. How much further will you let her go with you? Will you wait till she has killed you quite? Already she has laid you there. That is not so. The speaker this time was Madeline. Lady Hildegard looked at her woodenly, then addressed her son. You hear the statement, added to all the rest, ought to show you the kind of character she is. You know it is a lie. Madeline went on before the earl could speak. My lord, it is no lie. Something, unfortunately for me, the greater part of what your mother says is true, but in attributing to me this particular crime she errs. I've been weak and therefore wicked, because I'm beginning to believe that weakness and wickedness go hand in hand. It is certain that in my case it has been so. I belong to a different caste from yours. I'm an inhabitant of another world. I've worked hard to earn my daily bread since I was a little child. To you it may sound strange, almost like a fairy tale, but it is a simple fact that as your world understands the term, you are the first gentleman I've ever spoken to, and this is the first time I've ever pretended to equality in the presence of a lady. I'm a daughter of the people, lowly born and lowly bred, and never have I known what it was to be the possessor of a superfluous penny. These things are true, but though a bare-faced impostor, as your mother puts it plainly, and maybe one of the scum of the earth, I have not joined to my other offences attempted murder. I did not stab you. No, my lord, there your mother errs. It was not I. The earl kept his eyes fixed upon the girl's face while she had been speaking. Now he turned to Lady Hildegard. May I ask you, my dear mother, to leave me for a little while with Madeline? It is she and I who must understand each other, and that without any further loss of time, alone together. Her ladyship objected. I shall do nothing of the sort. The girl would twist you round her finger. She's brazen-faced enough, seeing the kind of man you are, to try to persuade you into making her your wife. I wish she would try. I'd like to have to bear the brunt of such persuasion. The earl smiled, but the girl was crimson. She tried to withdraw her fingers from his detaining grasp, and failed perhaps because she did not assert herself with sufficient resolution. The Lady Hildegard was calm but scornful. Stuff! Staines, you are a fool. You'd let the hussy cheat you into discrediting the evidence of your own senses. Come, my girl, let me see how you'll back up the lie you've told. If it was not you who used that knife with such effect, who was it then? Maud Dorincourt? The answer occasioned general surprise. the dowager showed least. Since Madeline's declaration of her identity, she had remained twisted half round on her chair, watching her with an attention which never wavered, and a stolidity which betrayed nothing of what was passing through her mind. Now that she was surprised, she showed by a quick movement of her ancient head, but that was all. Lady Hildegarde was outwardly but little more demonstrative. Loosing her grip of Madeline's arm, she clenched her fists, seeming for a second as if she were about to repel the girl's assertion with actual violence. But there she stopped. It was the Earl and Mrs. Singleton who made an effort to conceal the surprise they felt. The man's sallow cheek grew paler, the trace of colour which had been in them fled. His jaw became square and set, his whole expression hard and rigid. His eyes gleamed. He looked like one on whose nerves there had been a sudden strain which had strung them to their utmost tension. Mrs. Singleton, on the other hand, was all in a fluster of rage, so much so indeed as to become inarticulate with passion. Rushing at Madeline, she shook her fist at her in speechless fury. Presently, however, she recovered sufficient self-control to enable her to burst into a torrent of execrations. "You wicked girl! You shameless creature! You lying wretch! To dare to utter such a falsehood! I wonder you are not afraid that God will strike you dead, that you should venture to try to pass the burden of your own wicked sin on to Miss Maud, when you know that the poor darling is far, far away from here, dead, buried, for all that any one can tell. She is not dead or buried. How do you know? Because, not many minutes ago, I was speaking to her." "You were speaking to her? You?" "Yes, I. She has been hiding from you all the time beneath this roof." "Hiding from me? From me?" "From all of you. You have driven her to it, between you. You have treated her, not as if she were a creature of flesh and blood, into whose veins God has breathed life to use it as her own, but as if she were a thing of clay, which you might fashion into what shape you choose. You have refused to admit that she has a right to order her own existence just as much as you have a right to order yours, and that since she and she alone is responsible to her Maker for what she does with it, you are not entitled to twist it this way and that, and to trammel it with conditions which her very soul abhors. And so she has hidden herself away from you, since only in concealment she can obtain even a taste of that liberty for which her whole being aches and longs. But how do you know all this? Where is she hidden? Her hiding place is not very far from where you stand, and from her own lips I know it. I had only been in the house a little while, when she came to me, and made of me her confidant, imploring me, so long as I was able to continue, to take her place, and to allow her to remain at peace. Had she not done so, I should not have stayed, being almost as conscious as Lady Hildegarde that my position, into which, as Mrs. Singleton is aware, I had been drawn against my will, was hardly one which a woman of the higher type would care to fill. But when she entreated me, I yielded, wherein I was weak and maybe wicked, and for my weakness and wickedness I have suffered, and am like to suffer more." There was silence. All eyes were fixed upon her. Each seemed conscious of appearing at a disadvantage, of a feeling as if, though it ought to have been the other way about, she was the judge and they the judged. The dowager gave voice to what was possibly the common sentiment. Never once throughout the scene had her hawk-like eyes strayed from the study of the girl's rapt countenance. "At least, young woman, you do not want the courage of your convictions. Did you ever before a baggage carry off what is something more than a piece of brazen impudence with such an air? My courage is not often lacking, though it sometimes is. Was it what you call lacking when you stood up before all that crowd of people, pretending to be my grandchild, allowing me to use you as if you were, and promised yourself as wife to the Earl of Staines? I was not afraid, and since you ask me, I'm not sure I'd not like to go through it all again to-morrow." "Upon my honour." "And promise yourself to another earl, I take it, ma'am?" "No, to the same one, if it please your ladyship." "You're over scrupulous. It's out of character. Surely you're of the sort of woman to whom a man's a man, and so long as 'tis a man, 'tis all you want. Your ladyship is pleased to jest. And you, are you pleased to be in earnest? Do you propose to hold him to the troth which he has plighted, and threaten breach of promise if he should chance to fall away?" "Your ladyship understands me very ill, if you suppose it. I know, as well as you, that I am not fitted for his wife, and promise not only that I will never let him marry me, but that when I go away from here, which will be in a minute now, he shall not see my face again." The earl struck in. "Be careful what you say, Miss Orme. Make no rash promises. I shall have a word to say on that." "You will have no word to say, my lord, and when you give it your consideration, you will see on this point, at any rate, that I am right." "My lordship will see nothing of the kind, so let's have no more misunderstanding there. On the Earl's face there was a smile which suggested that, in this matter, he was prepared to join issue, and which seemed to irritate his mother. The Lady Hildegard favoured Madeline with some further excerpts from her stock of plain English. "Well, my girl, you've treated us to some tall talk, and to some sounding speeches, and played your part of impudent impostor right out to the end, forgetting all the time that I have but to send for the police to have you lodged in jail, to lie there perhaps until you rot and die, for the crime of attempted murder. As I have told you already, you are under a misapprehension. If you were to send for the police, as you threaten, it would not be me whom they would lodge in jail, not you, you past mistress of all insolence. Who then? I'm afraid, Lady Hildegard, that they would have to arrest Maud Dorincourt." As she spoke, the door opened to admit Reginald Fanshawe and his friend Mr. Champnell. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of The House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The release of Signor Bianchi. I hope with Mr. Pry that we don't intrude, but it almost seems from the few words which reached my ears as if our entry were quite opportune. Is it possible that I heard my fair cousin say that she was to be arrested? Reginald's gentle, soft, carefully modulated tones, seeming to express so much more than was conveyed by the literal meaning of his words, affected his hearers not altogether agreeably. Madeline turned towards him with, in her bearing, a possibly unconscious touch of hauteur. She held her head a little back, and had the air of looking down on him from above. I said that I was afraid that if anyone were to be arrested, it would be Maud Dorincourt. "Is that so? And you said you were afraid? How truly unfortunate! And what will be the excuse those pernicious policemen will offer for such an outrage?" "According to your mother, it will be for the crime of attempted murder." "Attempted murder, indeed? Only attempted? And for such a triviality you stand in danger of such indignity?" "I did not say I did. I said Maud Dorincourt." He looked puzzled, and was, as his question showed. "I beg your pardon. It is my stupidity, but I'm afraid I don't quite follow you." "I am not Maud Dorincourt." His mask-like visage, over whose mutations he kept such careful watch and ward, underwent an entire alteration. His graceful smile, which he seemed to wear as a sort of ornament, passed from his face as if it had slipped and fallen. His beautiful eyes became all in an instant ugly. His jaw shut tight like a rat-trap. The lines deepened about his eyes and lips, each individual one seeming to suggest a separate snarl. Evil temper so debased his whole appearance that one realized his wisdom in endeavoring, in an ordinary way, to prevent the revelation of the kind of man he really was, by concealing his countenance behind the visor of even an artificial smile. He hurried forward, his stature dwarfed by passion. There are men it exalts. It made him smaller. The smoothness had gone from his voice. He screeched, "So you're hold, and you think to scramble out by an 11th-hour confession. But it isn't good enough, my dear. That cock won't fight." He turned to the others with a burst of malignant spleen. "I spotted her from the first. She didn't take me in. She's here and knows it. I knew she wasn't Maud. I smelt the street girl." "Reginald!" The interruption came from the earl in the bed, and conveyed, or should have conveyed, a warning. "Well, she is a street girl. Singleton picked her off it. She'd been kicked into the street for misbehaviour. I've just had it from the lips of the man who kicked her." "Have you? "Then perhaps you'll be so good as to bring him here. I'll have it from his lips as well." The tone was ominous. The earl's look was ominous too. Reginald screamed back at him, "Don't be an infernal fool. I tell you, man, the girl is nothing but a wretched beggar, who keeps herself alive God alone knows how, and whose most decent habitation, from the moment she was born, has been an attic. Chapnell and I have found out all about it. Singleton saw how like Maud she was. He brought her to Mrs. Singleton. Between them they hatched a precious plot, and foisted her off on to you as Maud, for which pretty piece of business, if I have my way, the pair of them will go to jail. It is this penniless adventuress, to use, as you'll yourself admit, the mildest possible word, who has been playing off on you these charming tricks, making you believe that Maud had changed her mind, pretending to love you, actually publicly promising to be your wife, the future Countess of Staines, my faith, winding up as an appropriate climax by sticking a knife between your ribs. That's a lie. Bah!" Mr. Fanshawe turned his back on Madeline, from whom the denial came, with a gesture of superlative contempt. "On such lips as yours, lies and truth are one. Mother, why don't you ring the bell and have her flung into the gutter? Particularly if, as I suppose, consideration for the family honour, which she has smirched more than enough already, will enable her to escape the public prosecution which she so justly merits." It was his brother who replied to him. "The reason why such an order as you suggest is not given is hardly that which you suppose. It happens, moreover, that Miss Orme has already acquainted us with the principal facts with which you, in your turn, have favoured us, and which you have coloured with an eloquence which is peculiarly your own." "Acquainted you? Is that how you put it? Why, my dear fellow, she knew the game was up, that Chapnell and I were on her track. She thought she'd get in front of us, that's all. I scarcely think that with Miss Orme that was the sole determining cause. However, I am obliged to you for your kind offices. Might I ask you to take no further interest in my affairs any more, for instance, than I take in yours?" "Your affairs? Is she your affair?" He pointed to Madeline. "I beg your pardon. I did not know it." "Reginald!" Again there was that note of meaning in the intonation of the Christian name. The queerly matched pair of brothers eyed each other disagreeably. Then the elder addressed himself to Madeline. To her his tone was one of even fastidious deference. "I must apologize, Miss Orme, for these frequent interruptions. Might I ask you to tell me precisely where Miss Dorincourt at present may be found, and of what offence I have been guilty that she should seek to deal out so severe a punishment?" "You have been guilty of no offence. It is not what you have done. She did not know what she was doing to you." "How is that?" The earl smiled. "The matter becomes more and more mysterious." The girl did not smile. Her bearing betrayed no disposition to levity of any kind. It was alive with that intense earnestness which had marked it from the first. She stretched out her hand with an eager gesture, the hand which the earl had for so long retained in his own. "It is mysterious. I don't understand it quite myself, but from what Signor Bianchi told me—" "Bianchi? I thought Bianchi would come in." This was Reginald. Madeline just glanced at him, and then went on. "From what Signor Bianchi told me, it appears that Miss Dorincourt was present in the music room when—" Madeline stumbled. Reginald filled in the hiatus. You did the head of the family the distinguished honor to promise to become his future countess. Auspicious moment. Madeline went on hurriedly, her cheeks glowing with an extra shade of color. After she went to speak to Signor Bianchi, and she became conscious that again she had reached a point at which explanation might be difficult. Again she stumbled, slurring over the proper sequence of events. A friend of his was present, whose name I think was Lazarus. This Mr. Lazarus cast on her what the Signor calls the evil eye. At any rate, he got her entirely under his influence. While she was in that condition, he made her go and look for you and stab you, she being all the time unconscious of what she was doing, just as much so as if she had been walking in her sleep. She spoke a little breathlessly, as if anxious to tell her story with all possible speed. Her words were followed by silence, the silence of astonishment, and also, it seemed, of incomprehension and incredulity. Reginald turned to Mr. Champnell with a movement of his shoulders which was intended to be significant of his entire disbelief. You perceive, Champnell, that the days of the romancers are not all gone. No wonder that so many novelists come to the front from among women, like Miss Orme. The Earl ignored his brother. What are we to understand, Miss Orme, by the evil eye? That you must ask Signor Bianchi. I only quote to you his words. But I do know that Miss Dorincourt did not know what she was doing, and that she does not know even now what it is that she has done. This Mr. Lazarus must be an amazing rascal. What injury have I done him, that he should be guilty of such an abominable act? Madeline was still. She was conscious that, at that moment, it might be inadvisable to point out that the whole mischief had had its origin in the Italian's jealousy. The Earl went on. And where do you suppose that will-o'-the-wisp of a girl is now? Have you any notion? When I last saw her, she was in the music-room, about to practise some songs. She may be singing still. Mrs. Singleton, ring the bell. I'll have inquiries made. Madeline interposed. If you'll excuse me, I think you may defeat your own purpose if you do. With your permission, I will go and see if she is there, and if she is, I will bring her to you. That is, if she will come. Reginald spoke. With your very kind permission, might I suggest that Mr. Champnell and I should act as your escort? It may require more than one to find this very elusive young lady, according to your own accounts, Miss Orme. Madeline received his offer with but a scant show of gratitude. It is a matter of total indifference to me what you do or where you go. I am unable to prevent your acting as what you call an escort. She addressed the Earl. I think, my lord, that if I am to find Miss Dorincourt in the music-room, the sooner I go the better. You will not be long. I will use what haste I can. And you will return? She hesitated. My lord, if you will not promise to return, and that without the least delay, you shall not go. That's flat. She appeared to consider. My lord, I will return, in the hope that Miss Dorincourt will condescend to confirm in my presence the truth of so much of what I have said as comes within her knowledge. The curiously assorted party went forth upon its errand, Madeline in front, Mr. Fanshawe, whose passion had become a sneer, behind, Mr. Champnell, whose shrewd, bright eyes nothing escaped, and by whose tongue nothing was betrayed, was at his shoulder, while Mrs. Singleton furtively, doubtfully brought up the rear. Her face, her bearing, her tremulous movements spoke of her anxiety to set eyes once more upon the girl for whose sake she had dared and done so much, yet who had placed in her so little of her confidence. When they reached the music-room, Instead of that glorious voice bursting on their ears, as Madeline had half expected, there was not a sound. All within the great room was still. From where they stood, just within the doorway, nothing and no one was in sight. The place seemed empty. Mr. Fanshawe commented on the fact, with a sneer. "The bird has flown, if she was ever here. You are quite sure you saw her here?" "I am quite sure." "It is a considerable satisfaction to know that you are certain. But since it seems plain that she has gone, where would you suppose, Miss Orme, that she has vanished to?" Madeline's quick eye had caught sight of something lying on the floor at the further end of the room, just beneath the gallery. She went quickly to it, the others still clinging to her heels. It was a sheet of music, a song, which lay there, crumpled up, as if it had come fluttering down from the gallery above. On the outside page was written, in big, sprawling letters, "Maud Dorincourt." "Unless I am mistaken, Miss Dorincourt is not far off. Perhaps we have disturbed her. If she had been gone any time, she would hardly have left her music lying on the floor. I fancy she thinks too much of it." "Perhaps she's hiding in the gallery." The suggestion was Reginald's. "Ladies have been known to hide and even double, when closely pressed. She's only to stoop low behind the gallery's front, and so far as any one down here's concerned, she's hidden. Let's go up and see. Perhaps we shall catch her in the very act of stealing away." They went out from underneath the overhanging roof, all glancing upwards. "Why," cried Reginald, "there's some more of her music on the ledge there. If she has gone, she's gone in a hurry. What's the betting that she isn't behind this panel now?" Putting his hand up to his mouth, he gave a view halloo. "Yoicks! Tally ho! Come out of it, fair cousin mine, we've fairly run you down. Now, Miss Orme, who will be the first to find?" He ran up the staircase, but Madeline was at his side. Together they reached the top. For a moment it seemed as if their speed had been for nothing, as Mr. Fanshawe proclaimed, "Halloa! She gone away! It is to be a chase. If I had bet I should have been the loser. Why—" He stopped short, staring. Madeline, looking where he looked, took up the parable where he had dropped it. "It's Signor Bianchi. Something has happened, something serious. I felt that something was wrong directly I saw the piece of music on the floor. Poor Maud!" It was the Signor, trussed precisely as Mr. Lazarus had left him, fastened hand and foot to his beloved organ, with the sheet of music still crammed down his throat. It was well they came upon him when they did. He was as nearly dead as might be. His friend had done his work with malevolent thoroughness. The wad of paper thrust between the musician's jaws was large enough to distend them to their extreme capacity. His efforts to get rid of it sufficiently to enable him to cry for help had made bad worse. A little more and it would be choking him. As it was, his eyeballs were starting from their sockets, and his face was growing black. He was perched on the high stool in such a manner that when he struggled it threatened to topple away from underneath him, in which event he would have in all probability been hanged, for the cord was twisted round his throat and fastened to a stop so tightly that the sudden jerk which would have followed the falling of the stool would almost certainly have dispatched him from this world into the next. His hands and arms were tied close to his sides, the cord being strained with such merciless severity that one could see the great wheels of discolored flesh standing up on either side of it, where it cut into his flesh. The miserable Italian presented a spectacle as pitiable as it was unusual, and one at which the quartet of newcomers stared with looks of undisguised amazement. Mr. Champnell was the first to recover his wits. Taking out his pocket knife, he proceeded with all possible rapidity to cut the cords which bound him, drawing at the same time the gag from between his teeth, which latter task was not as easy as it might appear, so tense and rigid were his jaws, and with such savage cruelty had the wedge been driven in. The result was what might have been foreseen. No sooner were the bonds relaxed than Bianchi groaned and swooned, only recovering from the swoon to be constricted by an agony of pain. The blood, struggling again to circulate, seemed to penetrate his veins like molten lead. He writhed and twisted in his anguish. When he had somewhat recovered, it was to find himself confronted by 4 inquiring and bewildered faces. Mr. Champnell's voice, firm and clear, yet not unkindly, was the first to fall upon his ears. "Come, you are better now. Very soon you'll be all right. How comes it that you are in this extraordinary fix?" Bianchi's lips moved, but no comprehensible words proceeded from them. As yet his swollen tongue refused its proper office. It was still some moments before they were able to distinguish what it was he was trying to say. Then they understood that the word to which he endeavored to give utterance was a man's name. "Lazarus! Lazarus! Lazarus!" He mumbled it hoarsely, yet more and more distinctly, over and over again. "Yes, Lazarus, I hear. What has Lazarus done to you? And who is Lazarus?" Madeline touched Mr. Champnell on the arm. "I know. Ask him where Miss Dorincourt is gone." Mr. Champnell obeyed. "Where's Miss Dorincourt, do you know?" It was plain he did know something. At the mention of the lady's name he showed more signs of returning consciousness than he had done hitherto, raising himself out of Mr. Champnell's arms and sitting up upon the floor. "Miss Dorincourt! Maud! He has taken her! Lazarus! May the saints in heaven bless her!" He clenched his fists, his black eyes shifted uneasily in their sockets, his voice went quiet. "He has taken her! What do you mean, he has taken her?" Bianchi struggled to his feet, painfully tottering. When he gained a footing, he was possessed by some uncontrollable agitation, which drove from him the memory of the pains he had endured, and from which it seemed he was suffering still. His whole frame quivered and shook with excitement, which was momentarily growing greater and greater. His southern nature asserted itself in gesticulations. He stretched out his arms, threw back his head, rolled his eyes, seemed to strain every muscle in his endeavor to give full expression to his strength of feeling. His words came faster and faster. "He has cast on her the evil eye. Heaven that such things should be! He has taken her away, right away. Where, I do not know. With him alone. She is in his hands like a doll, a dummy, a nothing. My beautiful, dream of my eyes, star of my soul. He is going to marry her. Yes, he is going to make of her his wife. His wife! My God, the devil, the thousand times devil!" He had worked himself up all at once into a state of frenzy, presenting an odd picture of insensate rage. "He is going to marry her? Miss Dorincourt? Of whom are you speaking? Explain yourself." "It is easy, as plain as print. It is her voice he is after, her voice. He cares nothing for her youth, her beauty. No, nothing at all. It is only her voice he wants. In it he sees heaps of money, heaps and heaps. And there, my God, he is right. There is a gold mine in her voice, a gold mine. He says to himself, if I marry her, if I make her my wife, she will be mine, and her voice too. There will be a gold mine in my pocket, the 100,000 times devil." He wound up with a flood of imprecations in an idiom of his own. Mr. Champnell endeavored to arrive at a greater comprehension of what he had just heard. "Mr. Bianchi, calm yourself a little. We shall be able to understand better, and time will be saved. Are you saying you wish us to believe that Miss Dorincourt has gone away with this man Lazarus of her own free will, intending to become his wife?" "Of her own free will, my God, no. He has cast on her the evil eye." "Mr. Bianchi!" Madeline, coming forward, anxiously, even timidly, touched him on the coat sleeve. Swinging round upon his heels, when he saw her, he flung out to her his hands with a cry of ecstasy, which was not without its pathos. "Maud, it is you! You are back again! You are free from him! You have shaken off his chains! My beloved one! Light of my eyes! Queen of my heart! I rejoice with all my might and all my main. I would rather die 100 deaths than know you were in the hands of that scoundrel Lazarus, and at the mercy of his devil's will. God has been more good to me than I believed, since, after all, he has suffered you to escape from him, and to stand before me once more your own beautiful self, so that I may feast upon you with my lovesick eyes." Madeline shrunk back, all pale and trembling. "I am not Maud. Don't you remember? I am she who, to my own great misfortune, God has seen fit to make so like her. I'm Madeline Orme." Bianchi did remember, with a sense of shock. He too drew back. His manner changed. "Oh, yes, I remember. Oh, yes. You are Madeline Orme. You are the cause of all the trouble. You are she who has brought on us all the plagues of heaven, who has plunged us into the waters of bitterness, so that we may drink them to the dregs, and suffer more than those who die. Well, I hope you are content. Your double, whom you have so cleverly pretended to be, is at an end. She is done for good and all. She is in the hands of Lazarus. When he gets in his hands a thing, especially if that thing is a woman, by the time it gets out of them again, there is very little left of it, nothing that is worth anything. Of that you may be sure." Madeline's trembling increased. The little man's passionate, if curiously chosen words, seemed to make her quiver as if they had been the thongs of a whip. "Mr. Bianchi, do you mean that he has her under his influence again, that he can make her do as he chooses, as he did before?" "That is what I mean. That's just it. What he calls his accursed power, I do not know. It is an attribute of Satan, a thing of evil. He holds out his hands. She obeys the wagging of his finger. He drops his hand. She falls in a heap on the floor. He raises it. She gets up again. She puts her arm through his. She goes off to marry him, to become his wife. May the saints in paradise entreat the good God to take pity. Better for her that she should marry a real devil out of the true hell." "But, Mr. Bianchi, where has he taken her? Where have they gone?" "I do not know. I know no more than you. Beyond that she has gone to be his wife, I know nothing. But he is a friend of yours." "He is not a friend. Never. He is an acquaintance only. It is true that he has been known to me for several years, but as no more than an acquaintance. We are not enough in sympathy. He is always mocking." "But where is his home? Where does he live?" "He has no home. He lives nowhere. To day he is in London, to morrow in Paris, the day after in Vienna. You find him in Milan, St. Petersburg, New York, South America, wherever he is at the moment. That is his home. It is all the same to him." "But you know his address in town?" "Not I. I see him this morning for the first time for 2-3 years. Where he has been in the meantime, I know no more than the dead. He say nothing, I ask no questions." "But you must know some more of his acquaintances, and they may know?" Bianchi reflected. "I know a place where he is sometimes to be heard of, but that is all. It is a restaurant. There they may know what is his address, but it is by no means sure." "Let's go there and make inquiries. There's not a moment to be lost. He may be stopping at that very place, and Maud may be with him. I dare not think of what she must be suffering each second she is in his hands." "She does not suffer. She knows nothing. She will not know until it is too late, even if she knows then. Lazarus is too clever. He will not wish to have trouble." Mr. Reginald Fanshawe interposed. "It seems to me, Miss Orme, if Mr. Bianchi will excuse me, that the real meaning of this apparently mysterious business is that Miss Dorincourt is in one of her freakish moods, has chosen to go off with this peculiarly named gentleman for reasons of her own. I know Miss Dorincourt a trifle better than you do, and I do assure you that at any and every cost she will always be original." Madeline was furious. "It is quite in keeping with your character that you should talk like that, but in this case you don't know what you are talking about. If you had ever seen the man Lazarus, you would know better. He is the most horrible looking creature I ever beheld." Reginald raised his eyebrows. "Ah, if he is so very hideous, of course that counts." "Counts! I should think it did count. I am sure that no woman would ever willingly be left alone with him for 2 consecutive seconds. And as for marrying him," she finished the sentence with a shudder, "I am convinced that Mr. Bianchi is right. I'm going this instant to the restaurant of which he speaks, to find out, if I can, where the creature lives." She hastened towards the door at the side, through which Mr. Lazarus and his victim had passed together, arm in arm. Her eye caught sight of something lying on the floor. She snatched it up. It was the address side of an envelope which had been torn. "Why!" she exclaimed, "what's this?" She read what was written on the sheet of paper. "Mr. Lazarus, Wellington Mansions, Chelsea." The number is torn, but the rest is plain enough. Why, I do believe that it's the man's address. Signor Bianchi struck his forehead with his fist. "What a fool I am! What a fool! I remember now that he told me that he had taken a room in the Wellington Mansions. What was the number? I forget the number, but it does not matter. I will find him without the number, and I will have his life, or he shall have mine. I swear it by all the saints in heaven." The excitable Italian rushed through the door, followed by Madeline, with Mr. Champnell close after. Mrs. Singleton went forth crying like some frightened child. Mr. Fanshawe remained by himself, twisting the ends of his moustache with his fingers, smiling to himself. Then, after a second or two, he went leisurely after the others. Chapter 20.
Chapter 21 of the House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Cat and the Mouse. The apartment was not remarkable for elaborate upholstery. A strip of felt carpet, red lozenges on a white ground, was on the floor. A bed was in a corner, and in another corner was a combination article of furniture, which served as wash-hand stand, toilet table, and chest of drawers. A large, curious-looking wooden box was before the fireplace, a small table in the centre, which articles, together with 2 cane-seated chairs, one with the back off, practically completed the chamber's garniture. The French window opened, as one perceived through the uncurtained panes, onto a small balcony. Before it stood Mr. Lazarus, the most prominent object the room contained. He was lighting a wooden pipe, using in the operation, as it seemed, an unnecessary number of matches. Each one, as he lighted it, he held for the briefest moment in close proximity to the bowl, and then threw it, still flaming, at Maud Dorincourt, who was seated in the centre of the room, sometimes hitting, sometimes missing. Whatever the result might chance to be, it seemed to afford him equal amusement. With each match he threw, his grin grew broader. Certainly the girl did present a curious spectacle, the effect of which was heightened when one reflected that this was the daughter of 100 earls, who had been bred in the very lap of luxury, whose beauty was famous, of whose glorious future such wondrous visions had been dreamed. Her hair was disarranged, loose coils dangling about her neck and ears. This confusion of her lovely locks, which was not of that alluring kind of which poets prattle, added to the incongruity of her attire. She was still clad in that gorgeous gown in which she had appeared with such signal effect to her cousin of Staines, but in some way, like her tresses, it had become disordered too, and was warped, creased, twisted, so that it seemed not only shabby, but tawdry, and positively became her ill. Sparkling gems were on her fingers, gleaming bracelets on her wrists, but they also only added to her bedizened appearance. She was sitting on the backless chair, limply, like some lay figure, and was as lifeless as one. Mr. Lazarus flung at her his flaming matches, but she seemed to be indifferent whether they did or did not strike her, continuing motionless even when the burning missiles were
flirted against her face. He could hardly have had a better cock-shy. It was this inanimation which seemed to afford him so much amusement. Presently, tiring of his sport, or concluding that he had wasted sufficient matches, puffing at his pipe, which was now well lighted, he strolled close up to her. He pulled her hair close to the skin, twisted her ears, filliped his fingers against her nose, pinched her neck and arms, she evincing not the slightest consciousness of either the pain or the indignity to which he was subjecting her. Impassiveness, carried to such lengths, moved him to speech, to critical comment. "This is the very oddest thing of all the odd things I've known, the queerest. All my life I've been looking for a man or woman, a woman preferred, into whom I can project my own personality so completely that he or she shall become the reflection of myself, the creature of my will, the slave of my desire. And after all these years, just when I was not looking, I've stumbled upon a woman. And such a woman! My stars! So lovely, and so young, of so high a family, with so great a fortune at her back. I'm afraid that not much of that fortune will be for me. There will not be a great dowry given with my wife. But that doesn't matter. We will try to do without it. The pair of turtle doves we are. I think that in her I shall find a fortune of another kind. Sing through the scale 3 times, as loudly as you can." These latter words he addressed to Maud with a peculiar directness of intonation. The moment they were spoken she sat up, held her head straight, opened her lips, and went thrice up and down the scale with a force, a clearness, a spontaneous burst of melody, which was marvelous. Then, like some clockwork figure, her lips reclosed, her head sank forward, she became all limp again. The effect was almost supernatural. It impressed Mr. Lazarus not a little. Wonderful, extraordinary, very queer indeed. It is not only the voice, which is the greatest the world has ever known, when he said that Bianchi was inside the mark. It is the obedience. If I was to exhibit her as a subject only, I should make my fortune. I am sure of it. I've been the greatest mesmerist that ever lived upon the placards, and I've done some wonderful things with my subjects, but then I have had to pay them every night in advance, and even then at times they have refused to do all that was set down in the bond, with my money in their pockets. Oh yes, I've had my troubles with my subjects more than once, even 2 free fights. But this is real, this is genuine, this is the actual thing. Investigation challenged, exposure defied. The mesmerized lady, the only genuine article that has ever been exhibited. What jokes I could have with her if I were to show her at so much a head at some of the places of which I know. My stars, I believe she would draw as much money in that way as with her voice in another. Stand up. The girl stood up with automatic suddenness. Jump over the chair. She jumped over the chair with surprising ease and lightness. Dance the Highland fling. She danced it with indescribable grace and deftness, picking up her skirts at times just high enough to show her dainty feet, flashing hither and thither beneath her silken drapery. It was as charming an exhibition of its kind as one would care to see. A spectator would have found it difficult to credit that she did it all unconsciously. Mr. Lazarus was himself constrained to wonder. It is a marvel, nothing else. I wonder what it is, in her or in me, that does it. As a rule, it is the weak person who is influenced, the hysterical, the underfed, the neurotic. But she is not weak. No, she looks to me as if she had the constitution of an ox, as if she did not know what nerves meant. Yet there must be in her somewhere what shall I call it? a muscle, a nerve, a something which dominates her altogether, on which the whole of her consciousness is built, so that when an outsider gets control of it, there is an end for her of a separate existence, of an individual being, of a personal responsibility, forever and forever. It is very curious indeed, most queer. It is fortunate that it is I who have got control of that little unknown something, fortunate for me and for her. Yes, and for her. His grin was eloquent. He pulled steadily at his pipe, expelling clouds of smoke through his nostrils. But come, why should I have all the conversation to myself? Since I am favored with the presence of so charming a young lady, why should I not have a little talk with her, a little exchange of ideas, a little communion of soul? We will see. Placing himself on the other chair, with the unbroken back, stretching out his legs, he placed his huge feet in their coarse, street-stained boots on the girl's lap, she paying no more attention to them than if they had been nothing at all. He eyed her from under his nearly closed lids, as a collector might regard a newly acquired specimen of an unusual kind. Come, do not look so glum. Do not keep your beautiful lips so tightly closed. I will be kind to you. You may speak. I am not a man that wishes always to be too severe. There must be discipline, especially must there be discipline where a woman is concerned. But at those times when discipline may be relaxed, I allow a little latitude. Oh yes, believe it of me. Talk to me. Open to me your heart. Let me peep into your soul. Like all young girls, you have your notions. Tell me what you have proposed to do with yourself, with your life, with your voice. Speak, I listen. There came over her the same change which had come before. She sat up straight, posing her head a little back upon her shoulders. A slight shadow seemed to flit across the vacuous countenance, as if she were making some kind of an effort to collect her thoughts. Then, opening her lips, she began to speak in a sweet, tremulous monotone, straight on like a child who recites a lesson. Not once did she pause or hesitate, but continued to pour out to this strange auditor the most secret thoughts of her heart, speaking to him without disguise of matters which, under ordinary circumstances, she would rather have torn out her tongue than have hinted to a creature of his sort. Now she dwelt on them with a candor and simplicity which is characteristic of the child which prattles at its mother's knee. My voice? I've always thought that I would like to use my voice for the glory of God and for the happiness of men. I've dreamt that I was in heaven, and God came and touched my throat and said, I've given you that which I never gave to anyone before. Use it for me to increase the sum of the world's happiness. I've dreamed this so often that I've almost begun to believe that it really happened. It has come to me both when I've been asleep and awake. Sometimes when I've been wide awake in the middle of the day, something has suddenly seemed to come over me, and I've been in that place in heaven which I knew so well, and God has come to me, and it has all happened over again. I do think that God has spoken to me in his own fashion, and I dare not disobey. Indeed, I wouldn't if I dared, for what could be sweeter and grander and better than to sing for the glory of God? And so when I am alone, I sing my very best, feeling that it is to him, and that he will know it is to him. And sometimes when I have been in better voice than usual, and have sung my very, very best, in the silence which has followed, I have felt that a presence was with me in the room, a presence which has said to me, well done. How can the applause of crowds compare to the applause of God? Or what triumph can be greater than to be approved of him? The girl's face was uplifted. A certain radiance seemed to be shining through the mask, which the man in front of her had riveted on her features. She went on in the same easy, gentle murmur, as if the words rose to her lips as spontaneously as the bubbles rise to the surface of a glass of sparkling water. As for the second part of his behest, that I should use my voice to increase the sum of the world's happiness, I've often asked myself how best it could be done. I've asked guidance of him, and I think that perhaps it has been given me. I shall have enough to live upon. I shall not have to sing for money. It is true that if I refuse to marry Staines, Grandmamma will not leave me her fortune, but I've something of my own put by, and I've little doubt that in one way or another I shall not be in actual want. So what I propose to do is this. I shall visit all the countries of the world, and I shall sing in all the great cities to all who choose to come and hear me free. I shall sing to them always, so long as my voice endures, for the glory of God. And that will make the people happy? The inquiry came from Mr. Lazarus. Yes, I hope that will make the people happy. In her voice there was perhaps a faint suggestion of a dormant doubt. And where do you propose to sing? In the open air? In the great halls of the great cities? My experience, of which I've had a trifle, is to the effect that people value a free show at what it costs them. But that is by the way. Who is to pay for the great halls in the great cities? And I suppose there will be something for advertisement. Will you have a collection at the doors? And will you have it taken up as they go in, or as they come out? No, I do not think there will be a collection. Who then is to find the money? Do you propose to sing for nothing, and to pay for the halls as well? That is a pretty scheme. I do not know. I am sure that God will point out the way. You have a nice notion of how to make of yourself an utter fool. I've never listened to anything so nonsensical, and in my time I've listened to some rubbish. Now that I've heard you, I begin to understand how it is that you are sitting there. A woman who nurses such an idea in her mind must have something wrong somewhere with her works. Since therefore you are sure, sooner or later, to fall into the hands of an adventurer, it is just as well that, at the very beginning, you have fallen into mine. How about Bianchi? I thought you were to marry him. I am not certain. It depends on several things. But I thought you loved him. Yes, I love him. Well, in marriage, love is not the only consideration in the eyes of God. Do you think he would let you sing to the people free? I'm not sure. I am sure, dead sure. He has some sense. He is a musician. It is for music that he lives. Yes, for music and for dollars. Withdrawing his feet from the lady's lap, Mr. Lazarus rose from his chair in something like a pet. You are an idiot, an entire idiot. You are mentally deficient. In you somewhere is the seed of imbecility, which will germinate and take root and grow until you become all mad. On his face, as he spoke and in the way in which he looked at her, there was more than a suggestion of the strain of madness which was in his own blood. He went on in quite a rage. To think of singing to the people free, you fool! Why, if you sang to them free, they would not come to listen to you. Why do people not value the wild flowers which grow by the wayside? Because they are to be had for nothing. If you were to offer a man who has money in his pocket a bunch of wild flowers, and a bunch of flowers from the conservatory, though the wild flowers were the prettier, which would he choose? The flowers from the conservatory, because for them he would have to pay. The wild flowers he would get for nothing, and therefore he would esteem them common. That which a man can get for nothing he has plenty of, and of what he has plenty he tires. It is for that of which he does not have plenty, and can never get plenty, never, never, that he always craves. So with your singing, sing to the people in the street. They will pass on, they will not even stop to listen, but sing in the Albert Hall, and charge a guinea for a seat. They will come from all parts of England to hear you. You mark my words and see. He pointed at her a protrusive finger. One thing I advise you, not to think that a scintilla of that dream of yours will ever come true. I assure you, by the living Jingo, whoever that may be, that you will never sing to any one anywhere, unless I see my way to make something out of it. Never. I'm not such a fool. Do you know? Be attentive. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you know what it is to be your future life? No. The answer came with an automatic clearness which he seemed to find amusing. You are going to be my wife. Would you like to be my wife? No. This time neither the answer nor the fashion of it seemed to afford him quite so much pleasure. "What's that? You would not like to be my wife? You'd better change your mind, double quick. Say, 'I would like nothing better than to be your wife.'" "I would like nothing better than to be your wife." The responsive words were uttered with a prompt simplicity which would have been more effective had it not been quite so wooden. "Say, 'I love you, Aaron Lazarus, with all my heart and soul, and with all my mind and body.'" The echo came in the same dull, mechanical fashion as before, but he appeared to find it satisfactory. "That is well. Since you love me, show it in a proper manner. In all things be obedient. Do not spare yourself in anything. Make of yourself a willing slave, as becomes a wife. Then when I am in a good temper, I'm not always, I will sometimes not be too severe with you when I think of it. But understand, I make to you no promise. From you I shall expect everything. From me you have to expect nothing, and you will get it. You will be like the dutiful dog, to whom sometimes is thrown a crumb from the table when those who sit at meat have fed. With me it is in this way. I am in a devil of a fix. I've had a little accident with a young girl. She was a bender, a contortionist, and she died. She was not worth very much to me, but she was all the income that I had. They are not well paid, contortionists, unless they do something which won't make the people who look at them shiver with horror. Then they are paid like princes. I tried to make her do something which would make them shiver, and there was an accident. It is very queer how easily some people die. It was a long way off, but there was a great fuss, so I came away. All I brought with me is in that box." He pointed to the huge wooden box which stood before the fireplace. "I did not stop to bring more, lest I might have been able to bring nothing. So for the present I am not rich. I even fear that we shall have to support existence by means of those pretty baubles which you have upon your wrists and fingers. Take off your rings and bracelets and give them to me, my dear child. They shall be a wedding present to the bridegroom from the bride." She did as he bade her, handing the ornaments to him one by one. Her mother's wedding ring, however, refused to budge. "Never mind about that. We are not yet reduced to such a point. When we are, we will cut it off. It will be easy." He scrutinized keenly the articles which he had with so small a show of remonstrance entrusted to his keeping, going close to the window so that he might have the full advantage of the light. "They are good stuff, these things of yours. They must have cost a little fortune, and I will get good money for them. You will see if I do not. We shall be in clover, you and I. I shall be able to afford myself many little luxuries, which I was afraid that I should miss. To begin with, we will be married according to the rites of the Christian Church, at the office of a registrar. Then we will go for our honeymoon to a little spot I know among the mountains in Hungary. There we will be quiet for a time, and we will be happy as the day is long. Oh yes, so happy. Then after a little while I will take you to a great musician of my acquaintance, whose word in the musical world is money, and you will sing to him a little song for nothing. That time it will be free. And after that I think the shekels will begin to come. You see how swift my brain moves. It is all settled in the twinkling of an eye. Your life for ever and ever. Now, in order that we may be married, it is necessary that the registrar should have 48 hours' notice. So the first thing to do is to give him notice, for we are in a hurry, and every moment is like a year until we are made one. But what am I to do with you while I go to give the notice? I will try a little experiment. Stand up." She stood up straight on the instant. "You understand all that I have been saying?" "Yes." The word was dully spoken, the very dullness seeming to suggest an intensity of pain. "I'm going to see how much of your consciousness I can take out of you, how much of your life I can absorb in mine. Look me in the face." She looked him in the face, and he looked at her. His eyelids opened with that sudden movement which was a trick of his. The nightmare orbs behind them were fastened on her poor, strained eyes. There was an interval which continued perhaps a minute. Then his hands, his arms, his whole frame began, as it were, to vibrate, as if he were subjecting every nerve to a tremendous strain, a vibration which her body copied with a horrible fidelity. As he went closer to her, her whole form, from the head down, began to incline slowly backwards, he bending over her, and seeming to prevent a too rapid descent by dint of some magnetic quality which emanated from his shaking body, holding her with some sort of positive attraction, so as to keep her from falling faster than he chose. At last she lay on the floor, quite flat, he glancing down at her, gloating with maniacal fervor on the havoc he had wrought. Her entire frame seemed to have shriveled, to have grown smaller. Her ordinarily lovely skin had assumed a parchment texture. All trace of color had gone from it. Her cheeks had fallen in. There was about her whole appearance a corpse-like quality, which anybody but Mr. Lazarus would have found repellent. To him, however, it seemed to afford lively satisfaction. It is wonderful, most curious, how strange are the mysteries of nature in which one stumbles unawares. I feel as if I had sucked some of the life out of her veins into mine. I believe I could draw it all out of her if I were to try. I'm sure that I could draw so much out of her that no one could put back any life into her but me. It is a power which one day I may find useful. In the meantime, do not let me forget that this is but a little experiment which I make, now to put back into her at least some of the life which I have drawn out. The process of resuscitation was not a rapid one, nor would any one but an individual of peculiar taste have found it pleasant. He had to bend right over her, glowering with his ogre-like eyes, recommencing that strange vibration of his body, as if he was again subjecting his nervous system to an unnatural tension. Presently her body began to quiver in sympathy, as it seemed, with his. She began to rise with him inch by inch, as if he drew her after him, until once more she stood up straight upon her feet. Then for some moments he continued to project his hands and arms towards her rapidly, on this side and that, until she sighed, and then he stopped. It was time, when it had only to look at him to perceive how great was the strain which he had been enduring. His head and neck were moist with perspiration. He panted as for breath, and trembled as with weakness. He sank down into his chair with a gasp, lolling, with his head back like some tired animal, staring at her through his once more narrowed eye-slits. If it is a labor of love, it is a hard one. It is not the sort of thing I would care to do a dozen times a day. I feel as weak as a rat. All the life has gone out of me again, back, I suppose, into her. It is strange enough, but the process, if mysterious, if often repeated, would become exhausting. That I can plainly see. Sit down. She sat down again on the backless chair. She returned to the limpness of a lay figure. He regarded her critically. "You are not looking so very pretty now, my dear. If I were to go through this performance frequently, all your beauty would soon be gone. I believe it would. Well, we will not do it more often than can be helped, for prettiness in a woman is an asset of some value to the man who owns her." He pulled himself together with something of an effort. He rose from his chair. "Will I go to give notice to the registrar of our union of hearts, of our marriage, my dear child? The first thing is to have you married for the sake of your good name, and for my sake too. You will be quite safe there till I come back. I think you will. I will not be long. When I return, we will make love to each other, true love in a way of our own." He put on a queerly shaped silk hat, which was unusually high in the crown and wide in the brim. Buttoning his coat up almost to his chin, he left the room, pausing without to lock the door and pocket the key. Then, taking out the rings and bracelets which he obtained from Maud, he submitted them to a further examination one by one. Selecting a particular ring, he placed it in an ancient leather purse. The remaining articles he deposited in the pistol pocket of his trousers. He went downstairs, 6 flights of them, which showed that the apartment which he had just quitted was situated at a considerable elevation above the ground. He paused at the door which led into the street, and which apparently was always kept wide open, to peer about him. As he did so, he caught a glimpse of a face which was looking through the window of a four-wheeled cab which had just been driven by. He instantly drew back into the shadow of the wall. "Bianchi," he muttered. "My stars, Bianchi." End of chapter 21. Chapter
22 of the House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Cat in a Corner. The mere utterance of the name Bianchi seemed to have on Mr. Lazarus quite a singular effect, as if someone had struck him a severe and unexpected blow, which had disturbed both his mental and physical equilibrium. Compressing himself within the smallest possible compass, hugging the wall as closely as he could, he looked about him furtively, as if he were afraid. Then turning, relinquishing apparently his intention of quitting the building, he hastened up the stairs again, going up much faster than he had come down, taking 3 or 4 steps in a stride, with a display of agility which, to say the least, was striking. About halfway up he paused, and leaning over the banisters, looked down into the depths below, with a look upon his face of panic terror. He waited for some seconds, listening, watching, not even seeming to breathe, then continued to ascend even quicker than before. Such was his agitation that, when he reached the door of his own apartment, he could not recall in which pocket he had put the key. He fumbled first in one and then the other in vain, cursing the while beneath his breath. Curse the key! Where did I put it? I cannot think where I put it. He bit his fingernails, his thoughts travelling to another theme. It was Bianchi, yes, not a doubt, and the other girl who slapped my face, and there were others. What are they doing here? Was it an accident, or have they? Curse the key! Even as he cursed, he found it. With a shaking hand he put it in the lock. The door was open. He passed within. On the very threshold a thought occurred to him which occasioned him apparently no slight discomfort. I remember, my stars, what idiot I am. There came a volley of oaths. I told Bianchi the address myself. I gave it him with my own lips. I said to him, "Lend me £10." He said he had not the money just at hand, but he would send it. I said, "Send it to me at Wellington Mansions, where I have taken an apartment." My stars, to think I should have forgotten, that I should have brought her here, that I should have put myself in such a trap. He hurriedly closed the door, locking it inside, repocketing the key. Each instant his agitation increased as the thoughts came hammering at his brain. He clutched the loose skin of his long, skinny throat with his cruel hand, twisting it this way and that, as if it had been india rubber. It is all over with me after all these years, I feel. I know it, and it is to my own incredible stupidity that I owe the finishing. The game is up, my course is run, my last bolt is sped, just at the moment when I thought I'd made the greatest coup of my life. My stars! He looked round the room, his glance falling on the unconscious girl, who still sat perched like a limp lay figure on her backless chair. As he realized her presence, a change came over his countenance which was almost too horrible to contemplate. In that instant he crossed the border line which divides the insane from the sane. The wild beast which was at the back of him came to the front. The man was mad. He grinned a mad man's grin. "It is for you. It is for you. I am in this hole. It is all your fault. All yours. You dear little child. You jade. Well, they will get me, but that is all they will get. They will not get much of you. That I promise them. I will be even with them before they—" He chucked himself with a significant gesture under his chin. "What shall I do to you? Let me consider. What shall I do to you that shall destroy you altogether, and hurt them most? Shall I? Shall I?"
A demoniac glare came on to his face, the lust of a satyr. After a moment or two, however, the expression faded, giving place to one which was not very much more pleasant. "No, there is not time. I might be interrupted. Besides, I can do better. I will take it from you, not only your innocence, I will take your all. You hussy!" He struck her smartly on either cheek. "Why do you not rise when I come into the room, you insolent animal? Stand up." She stood up instantly, the marks on her cheeks showing where his fingers had been. He noticed them. "What is that upon your face? How dare you have that redness on your face because I have the condescension just to touch you? How dare you?" He struck her again, 3 or 4 times in succession. "You see, that is what you get for having a redness on your face, and that is only the beginning. Attention! Look straight into my eyes for the last time in your life." As the man's great yearning, flaming eyes met hers, seeming to threaten to draw them from their sockets by sheer force of repulsive attraction, his continually increasing agitation at once affected her. In a moment she was all of a twitch. He regarded her as some hungry brute might the helpless victim which it proposes to presently devour. She, hanging on his glances in a spasm of expectant agony, the muscles of his face began to work. He opened his mouth, raising his lips so that the yellow teeth were seen beneath. Each instant his appearance became more ogre-like. When a convulsive shiver passed over him, he withdrew his eyes from her face, twisted his head round on his neck, and listened. "What's that? Who is that upon the stairs? Have they come already? My stars! I must be quick, or they will beat me at all points." Back went his face towards hers. Again he fixed on her his awful glare. Presently there recommenced that strange vibrative movement of his entire frame, as if it were the natural and inevitable response to the enormous strain which he was plainly putting on all his nervous forces. He gibbered to himself in a kind of frenzy. "Quick, quick, come out of her, life, come out of her, quick, quick, quick." It seemed as if, in answer to his conjurations, life did come out of her, actually and literally, so to speak, grain by grain, drop by drop. He seemed, by the exercise of some force, which was either prehensile or suctional, to be extracting the essence from her vital tissues, that essence which gave them being, so that while each second she appeared to shrink and shrivel and grow less, he increased and swelled, dominating her with a violence, both muscular and mental, which became more and more disproportionate to her own. It was strange to see her swaying as he swayed, her very finger tips keeping time with his in a sort of rhythmic echo. The motion of every muscle in his body she imitated with marvelous fidelity. Only there was this difference, that, while his movements became more strenuous, hers became perceptibly weaker, and still more weak, until the only thing of which she seemed capable was a continuous tremor. It was then that he appeared to put forth his utmost strength, to project his personality most completely into hers, to draw from her the last remnants of her vital force. It was then, too, that there commenced in her that backward, downward movement, which was so slow that the wonder grew as to what were the means which held her suspended in mid-air. He bent over her, forward, as she went back, so that, as the distance between them, at most 3 or 4 inches, remained the same, it seemed plain that it was from him the suspensive force must issue. But what was its nature? Nothing went to show. He finished, as he had done in the course of what he had been pleased to call his little experiment, by laying her on the floor, stiff and stark like a corpse, he stooping and gloating over her like some triumphant demon. A casual intruder would have declared she was a corpse. She had all the outward semblance. He placed his hand upon her bosom, his ear against her lips, his fingers on her pulse. The result was as he desired. There is not a trace of respiration, not a trace. I've drawn the life all out of her into me. I feel it in my veins. Oh, yes, I feel it. It is good to have her life as well as mine. It makes me feel young again and strong. It would be well always to have a young girl, pretty, in good health, from whom to draw a fresh stock of life. He turned her over with his foot, as if she were a log. She is as good as dead, and better. No one will be able to put life back into her but me. And I shall not choose. No, I shall not choose. I think not, except on my own terms, which will be high. Even should someone else be able to put life back in her, it will not be her own life. That I have. It will be someone else's life. What will she be like with someone else's life in her young veins? Bah! My stars, what a jest it would be if they were to move heaven and earth to bring her back to life, only to find her transformed into a sickly, rotten creature without a voice. How very funny it would be if, at the very least, she were to lose her voice. How she would be happy with her dreams of God, in that place in heaven which she knows so well. But no one but me will be able to put back life into her. No, no one but me. Not at all, try how they may. Of that I am sure. What shall I do with her? It would be inartistic to leave her here to hit them in the face directly they come into the room. There would be lacking the dramatic elements of a search and the subsequent discovery. Looking round the room, his glance reached the fireplace. The box. He went to the big wooden box, lifting the lid. No, it will not do. It is large, but it is hardly large enough. And then it is so full. Besides, it is commonplace. Everybody hides the body in a box. About the affair so far there has been that air of the uncommon which lends distinction. It would be a pity to detract from the effect. Handling carelessly the contents of the chest, he came on something which seemed to give him a notion. It was a cold chisel. A nice instrument, of that ingenious manufacture which takes to pieces, packing up, when unscrewed, into so convenient a compass that one may carry at a pinch the whole of it in one's coat pocket. The separate links were contained in a canvas bag. Taking them out, he fastened them together. The idea is not so original as I would have desired, but beggars cannot be choosers. Time presses, and it must serve. Something seemed to catch his ear. He glanced quickly towards the door, again with that look of panic, terror. On the stairs. No, not yet. They are longer than I expected. I wonder why every respite is a little gained. The chisel, when all the parts were joined, proved to be a serviceable tool, some 2 feet long or more. It resembled, in fact, one of those useful implements which have played, and still do play, so large a part in housebreaking, and which two gentlemen of the burglarious profession are known as crowbars. Holding it in his hand, he searched with his eyes the floor, and finally dragging aside the wooden box, he began to prise up one of the boards on which he had been standing. Forcing the point of his tool into an interstice, he used it as a lever. In a surprisingly short space of time, so deft was his manipulation, the board was up. He repeated the process with a second adjoining board, and again with a third. Then rolling the girl over and over with an evident appreciation of her unconsciousness of the indignity to which she was being subjected, he brought her to where a chasm now yawned in the floor. In you go. And in she went, between the joists, amidst the rubble and the rubbish, on to the rafters of the room below. The fit was a tight one. There was hardly room enough between two joists to admit the human female form divine, with his clothes on, but he managed. He crammed in portions with his hands and trampled in others with his feet, and somehow made a job of it. Then he replaced the boards, not being over particular about hammering in the nails. And over all he drew the wooden box back into its original position. Then he rubbed his hands together softly, with the gratified feeling of a man who has done well. They will have to find her now. Oh, yes, they will have to find her. This is more artistic altogether. Now she will not hit them in the eye as they come in, and perhaps they will not find her, at least for some time, by which time she may be altogether dead. Who knows? Who cares? What a voice was there! What a voice! Well, sometimes the world loses prematurely its greatest treasures, and never knows what it has lost. Who knows? Who cares? He moved to the window, stepping gingerly, as if he were afraid of being overheard. Turning the handle, he drew open the door, still with the same odd regard to quietude. He waited for a second or two, as if to discover if anyone had been disturbed. As the silence remained unbroken, he stole, like some prowling beast of prey, through the open window on to the balcony beyond. Crouching low, as if anxious that as little of him should be seen as possible, there ascended to him the noises of the street. On the roof, not far above him, some sparrows twittered. A bugle was blown, apparently in the barracks close at hand. He seemed to take in all these things, and to be searching among them for one distinctive sound, which he failed to find. Then, cautiously, he stole closer to the balcony's edge. The balcony was but a shallow one, probably less than 3 feet wide, so that he had not far to go. In front was a railing, not over high. It was attached to the balcony by iron rods. Through these he peeped, but they were not wide enough apart to enable him to thrust his head between, so that he could not see what was directly underneath. He hesitated, then with the same queer carefulness raised his head till he was able to see over the rail beneath. A 4-wheeled cab was at the door. Some people were getting out of it hurriedly, as if pressed for time. He waited for an instant, just long enough to enable him to catch a glimpse of what was going on below, to see the people from the cab come hastily into the house. Then he returned into the room, swiftly, stealthily, savagely. He took up his position against the wall, standing close to the door, so that when it was opened it might act as a screen, concealing him temporarily from the view of whoever entered. There he remained, as near to the wall as he could get, fidgeting with his hands, now rubbing them softly together, now biting at his fingernails, grinning all the time, and waiting. Steps were heard ascending the stairs, and there were voices whose intonation was not friendly. Someone tried the handle of the door, then rapped sharply at the panels. Then, when there was no answer, cried, brusquely, sternly, "Open the door in there." Mr. Lazarus continued silent. He ceased to bite his nails, holding out his hands in the attitude of one who is about to clutch at something. To himself he murmured, "That is not Bianchi. No, that is not Bianchi. That is a stranger whom Bianchi has brought with him. You are sure this is the room occupied by the man Lazarus?" It was the same voice which put the inquiry, the voice which replied Lazarus recognized as the janitor's. "That's his room, all right. Leastways, the name he gave me was Lazarus, and he's the man I've described to you. And you say that he's in here now? He must be, unless he's got up the chimney or out of the window. It's about a quarter of an hour since I saw him running up the stairs, and I heard him lock the door behind him. It hasn't been opened since, that I'm sure." Only a quarter of an hour ago? To Lazarus it seemed longer. A lifetime had been packed within those 15 minutes. And so the janitor had seen him. He had not seen the janitor. Where had he been? The strange voice continued. "And the young lady is with him?" "Where else can she be? He brought a young lady home with him, that I'll swear. He took her into his room, and she hasn't left it since." A sharp-eyed man, that janitor? He had been cognizant of more than Lazarus supposed. The gentleman behind the door felt that he would like to say a few words to him of a kind. There was a murmur of voices, not a friendly sound, one which suggested that several persons were without, who waxed impatient. There came another rapping, louder than the first. "Open the door. We know you are in there. If you don't open, we shall break it down." Lazarus only hooked his fingers and stretched out his hungry hands another inch or two, and grinned. He neither answered nor opened. So soon there came a fresh clamor at the panels, more exuberant than either of the others. "Lazarus, Lazarus, you devil Lazarus, you think to keep us out. You mistake. We will get at you through 100 doors." This time the voice was known to the gentleman inside. He recognized it with a sudden distension of his already exaggerated grin. He began to fidget ferociously with his hands, his fingers opening and shutting as if they itched. "That is Bianchi. That is my friend Bianchi, my dear good friend. If you will promise to come in by yourself alone, I will open the door at once. Then after a little while they can all come in, after a little while." But he did not say this aloud, or possibly the organist, flattered by the suggested compliment, might have availed himself of the kindly invitation. "Clear the way. Stand aside there." The voice which uttered the command, for it was a command, was the one which had been dominant throughout, and which sounded as if it were accustomed to giving orders and to being obeyed. Apparently the request was complied with, for presently a heavy body came dashing against the door, as if someone were hurling himself against it with all his force. Not much money had been spent on making the fastenings unduly strong. The gimcrack lock was plainly strained by the violence of the assault. Again and again and again there came the onrush of that vigorous frame, the lock yielding more and more, until the fourth time the door came open with a crash. People came streaming in. "Where is he?" inquired someone. Bianchi interposed, sounding as if he were half beside himself with excitement. "I will find him. By all the saints in heaven, I will find him." And he found him, then and there. Before the words were fairly from his lips, Lazarus sprang from behind the door, and seizing him with his hungry hands, bore him aloft as if he were a child. Before the others had realized the presence of the occupier of the apartment, or gained an inkling of his intention, Lazarus had dashed with his victim through the open window. Then, too late, they did rush after him with shouts and threats. Before they could reach him, with the little man, struggling, fighting, yelling, held tightly in his arms, he had sprung over the iron railing onto the stone pavement 6 stories down below. A scream rang through the air. Cries of horror rose from the street. Those looking over the railing held their breath, and all was still. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of the House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Swan Song. When they picked him up, Lazarus was dead, killed, as the doctor said, the inevitable doctor who had suddenly appeared upon the scene in half a dozen places. It was well for him, and well for the world, that he was dead. Sooner or later, anyhow, some decent soul would have been put to the labor of killing him. Bianchi still lived. Lazarus had fallen underneath. It was owing to that fact, or to some freak of fortune, that the organist owed his life. He was broken to pieces, a bundle of fractures, but the breath was yet in his body, and they kept it there, though he was never again to be the man he was before. Had it not been for the janitor's reiterated assurance that the chamber's tenant had brought a young lady in with him, and that she had not gone out again, those who had come in search of Maud might have taken it for granted that her abductor had secreted her in some other hiding place, and have left her to her fate. As it was, they ransacked every nook and cranny, turned out the contents of the huge wooden box in vain, and it was only when, in accordance with someone's suggestion that there might be a false bottom to the chest, the box itself was lifted, that some sharp eye perceived that the flooring underneath had been tampered with. Then very quickly the truth was learned. They found her crammed between the joists. In that moment, had Lazarus been alive and within reach of some of those who were present in that upper room, he would still have been very near death's door. He had done his work as thoroughly as he supposed. All the medical skill in Europe was summoned to her aid, without result. The empiric triumphed. The profession was at fault. As Lazarus had put it, he had taken the life right out of her, and not all the doctors of all the schools could put it back again. As was to be expected, opinions were divided. One great doctor said this, another great man ventured to surmise that, a third agreed with neither. The net result remained the same. The girl, so lately in the first full flush of her youth and health and strength and beauty, all alert with kindling ambitions, glowing with the hot mercurial blood which coursed restlessly in her veins, now lay stiff and stark, and yet not cold, for she was not dead, though to all intents and purposes she might have been. She neither moved, nor breathed, nor spoke, nor did any of those things which we associate with life, and yet she lived. Her condition was described by learned men in learned words, each said being apt to have their own particular formula, but the common sense of it seemed to amount to this, that she was in some sort of trance from which all their arts were insufficient to draw her out, and she faded visibly before their eyes. So much was clear. One bold man went so far as to say that she was dying, while they looked on, not knowing what it was she was dying of, unable to do anything to stay her advance towards the grave. This man was French, a leading light of the hospital of La Salpêtrière in Paris, where they make a peculiar study of certain esoteric conditions of the human frame, especially as they are to be found in females. This man, taking to himself a corner of the prophet's mantle, foretold that as she drew near death, she would return, as it were, of her own volition, to the portals of life, that is, to consciousness, and what he said proved true. Madeline, through all those weary days and nights, watched almost continually by Maud's bedside. Her remorse was pitiful to witness. She declared that the guilt of this innocent blood was on her head, that if it had not been for her offense, Maud would never have been in such a plight, and she implored them that they would allow her to some extent to expiate her sin by doing all that in her lay to win back for the girl something of that which she had lost. To this petition they acceded willingly enough, the more particularly since it was soon made plain that had they searched the whole world over, they could not have found one more skilled or more assiduous, a nurse more to the manner born. So a bed was made up for her near Maud's, and in that room she practically lived, worked, watched, waited, prayed. How she prayed, pouring out her heart's blood in supplications to the God, one of whose chief attributes she had always been taught was mercy. And at last it seemed that her prayer was answered in a measure. One morning between the dawn and the daylight she knelt beside Maud's bed and watched and prayed. She prayed that God's hand might be stretched forth, so that the girl who lay so silent on that splendid bed might be quickened into life. And behold, even While the petition fluttered towards the presence chamber, Maud moved for the first time during all those weeks. Madeline was so startled, the instant answer to her prayer seemed to speak with supernatural force of the nearness of omnipotence, that for the instant she lost her presence of mind. The movement was but slight, yet it was sufficient. Maud turned her head a little to one side, and to her inexpressible amazement, Madeline perceived that her eyes were open, and that she was regarding her with what appeared to be the light of reason. There was silence during the space of about a minute, as if each was realizing the overwhelming strangeness of the position. Then Maud said very faintly, yet with perfect clearness, "I thought that I was in heaven, and that God came and touched me on the throat." Madeline was bewildered, her whole being still occupied by the sensation of surprise. She could but murmur the other's name. "Maud." The response came quickly. "Sister." Such a mode of address from those lips at that time made Madeline's heart leap within her bosom, and blinded her eyes with tears. Her face fell forward on to the coverlet. She had to let it fall. For a while only her sobs were heard. Then there came the question from the bed. "Why do you cry?" Madeline lifted her face, her eyes streaming, her voice all broken. I'm so glad to hear you speak to me again. Like that. Are you better?" "Yes, I am better. I'm dying." "Dying?" The words stuck in Madeline's throat. There was something in the tone of Maud's voice, in the expression of her face, which made it impossible to contradict her. The girl went on. "Do you remember my telling you that I wanted to use my voice to the glory of God? Well, I'm going to, among the choirs of angels." Madeline was still. The revulsion of feeling was almost more than her strength could bear. Her expectations had been raised so high, in a moment to be dashed so low. She felt that what the girl said was true. She was becoming possessed by a profound conviction that already the angel of death was hovering near. Regardless of Madeline's silence, or of what it might mean, Maud continued talking in a strain which tried her listener to breaking point. It breathed a spirit which was so contrary to what she felt were her deserts. "You'll have to take my place when I am gone, for good. It will be for good, for better, not worse. You'll have to be me, a better me. I shan't be missed, except that people seeing you will stare to see how much I have improved. You'll have all my virtues, without my vices. You'll be just the daughter of the house is wanting, and which I never could have been, possessed of all my beauty, and all these other good qualities in which I've been lacking. Sister, won't you?" Madeline was silent, speechless. "Help to get my hand out from between these sheets. I want to feel yours clasped in mine." The request pointed to a degree of weakness which appealed to Madeline. On her practical side, the hand which she hoped to bring from beneath the bedclothes was wasted, white and worn, small as a little child's. It closed on hers with a gentle pressure which seemed hardly to speak of earth, and as it did so the door was opened. The Earl of Staines came in. He had about him a dishevelled look, suggesting a sudden rising from bed, a hasty putting on of his clothes. Maud greeted him with a faint smile, as if she had been expecting him. "I thought that you would come," she said. The earl glanced around him, as if bewildered, then from one girl to the other, recognizing Maud's condition with a start of amazement. "Maud!" An access of confusion seemed to overwhelm him. "I beg your pardon, but I thought I heard someone calling me. Yes, it was God." "God?" He echoed her blankly, having no notion of what she meant. His wound had healed, but he still bore about him traces of suffering, both physical and mental. He looked an older man than he ought to have done. She went on in the same almost unnaturally quiet voice, her enunciation being so clear that every syllable was audible. "I am dying, and God has called you out of sleep and sent you to me so that I can speak to you before I go, while we three are still alone. Dying, Maud? You are dreaming." "No, I've been dreaming, but I'm not now. I'm wide awake and can see and know. I'm going to where my voice will be of use, and I'm leaving her to you." With a glance she signified that the reverence was to Madeline. "Maud, I want you to promise me that she shall be your wife. If love can win her, I promise you she shall." He spoke coarsely, as if he had to put pressure on himself to enable himself to speak at all. She turned to Madeline. "I want you to promise too." Again Madeline's face was hidden in the coverlet, her vehement sobs threatening to choke her. "Maud, Maud, don't speak like that, don't. Think of what I am. Nothing, and worse than nothing. Think of what I've done. If it hadn't been for me, you would not be lying there. All would be well." Maud checked her with a slight movement of her hand. There was in her voice a touch of the old quizzical humour. "Hush! All is well with me, and will soon be better. Don't you love him, sister?" "Maud, Maud!" The girl addressed her cousin. "You hear? That is her answer. I will give you its interpretation. Her love for you is such that she has not speech enough to tell you of its greatness. Come, give me your hand." She raised her own hand from Madeline's with a degree of care and expenditure of time which suggested that it was a by no means easy thing to do. She jested at this evidence of her debility. "You see how strong I am." Her attenuated fingers closed with a little playful pressure on his sinewy palm. "Well, Staines, good day to you. God's in his heaven. All's well with the world." She made a small grimace. "I'm afraid I've only one hand under control. Madeline, raise yours directly. There, Staines, take it in yours. You love each other. I believe you were made for each other. I bid you marry in the name of God." They were still. The earl held Madeline's hand tightly pressed in his. Presently he stooped and kissed it. Maud smiled. "Bravo, Staines. Well done." Later she expressed a wish to be taken to what she called her haven of refuge, by which she meant the secret chamber, her seclusion, in which had been the cause of all the complications. By this time a small host of doctors had been summoned on the scene. It was their unanimous opinion that since she was drifting from time into eternity, and that nothing would be likely to materially retard or expedite her progress, it would be just as well to gratify any wish she might express, so far as it was possible. So they placed her in a chair, built her up in it with cushions, and bore her into the adjacent chamber, her own room, with its gorgeous scheme of colour. There they set the chair upon the floor, and under her specific instructions manipulated the springs which gave access to her hiding place. Since it was impossible to force any sort of chair up the narrow stairway, Staines carried her up, bodily, in his arms to the chamber above. There she startled them with a fresh request. "I want you to leave me, all of you. I want to be left alone in my haven of refuge from the world, to be left alone as I've always loved to be." Some of the doctors still remained. Again they were consulted. They shrugged their shoulders, implied that it did not matter. Nothing mattered so long as help was close at hand in case it might be needed, and an eye was kept on what took place. It was only another whim of hers which might as well be gratified. So they left her in the great curious chamber, all alone, seated in a huge armchair which had originally been conveyed up there she alone knew how, packed up in it, as comfortable as if she had been in bed. The trap-door which led into the room itself was kept open, without saying anything to her, and possibly without her cognizance, and crammed together on the narrow stairway Madeline, the earl, and one of the doctors remained on guard, probably again without her knowing they were there. And before long a strange thing happened. She had been very still, and perhaps, judging from the silence, had remained seated motionless in her chair, dreaming dreams, living through the past once more, drinking in details, each of which carried to her brain its own particular significance, of the hiding place she loved so dearly, and for whose existence she had paid so much. Madeline pictured to herself the girl's rapt glances, travelling round and round that queer archaic chamber, and the little tremblement of the lip each time they lighted on some one or other of her more cherished treasures, and was wondering if it was right to leave her any longer in that perfect silence which might mean so much, when there fell on her ears the sound of a song. Maud was singing. It was so unexpected, and the thoughts of each one of the listening trio had been so occupied with other themes, that for a moment it seemed as if the thing was supernatural, as if instinctively they drew even closer together, if that were possible, and held their breath in a kind of awe. In that closing hour there had come back to her the gift which, in her strange waywardness, she had valued above all else, above wealth and rank and beauty and even human love, the gift of song, come back to her in undiminished splendor. For strangely enough, while her speaking voice had grown so weak and faint, her singing voice had all its old range and strength and tone, its marvelous timbre. It was like an organ pealing. Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, while the gathering waters roll, while the tempest still is high. Of all the songs in the world, she had chosen to sing the hymn with which she had illustrated with such fatal effect her transcendent gift to Lazarus, when already he had her in his toils. Probably her choice was guided by the consciousness of its appropriateness at that, the supreme moment of her life. Beyond doubt it was a song she loved. To them, huddled together on the stairway, it was as if it were an angel singing. She poured forth such a wealth of celestial harmony, with such rapturous emotion and such an ecstasy of joy. She sang it right to an end, the concluding words ringing out, as it seemed to them, in a triumphant burst of melody, which was beyond and above all that had gone before. Thou of life, the fountain art, freely let me take of thee. Spring thou up within my heart, rise to all eternity. And then was still. Presently, urged by the doctor, Madeline went up to see what was happening. With a cry, she climbed into the room, the others pressing after her. Maud was dead, asleep in the eternal arms. She was on the floor, in front of her chair. It seemed as if she had stood up to sing, holding out her hands, perhaps to meet the advancing angel, who, when he had removed her spirit, laid her body softly down. She seemed a tired, happy child at rest. She could hardly have sounded a better advance note, or sent it pealing with a more glorious sweetness into the very courts of heaven. It promised an efficient recruit to the angel choir. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of The House of Mystery by Richard Marsh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Great Lady. Madeline Orme is the present Countess of Staines. She is one, to be guilty of a seeming bull, against her will, yet with it, confessing her love, yet maintaining, on various grounds, her personal unworthiness. It was not without a struggle that she yielded, though it was well for her she did, for she is at present perhaps the happiest woman in England, as she has made her husband the happiest man. The marriage took place with the full approbation of the Countess Dowager. That resolute old lady gave Madeline much more of her affection than she had ever bestowed on Maud, maintaining, with her latest breath, that she must be the mislaid twin sister of the story books, that she must be closely joined to the family by ties of blood. That it was not so was clearly shown. It was proved beyond all possibility of doubt that her father had been the Reverend John Orme, clerk in Holy Orders, and her mother, his wife, Madeline Rayburn, at one time governess. At the time of his marriage, Mr. Orme had been a curate. Within a year he was drowned while bathing. The news, brought to his wife an hour or two after Madeline's birth, sent her after him. The baby girl was adopted by the landlady of the house in which the Ormes were lodging, a Mrs. Clifford. No relatives of her parents could be found who were living, so this good woman brought up the little friendless orphan while she lived with her own son. Madeline Orme and Geoffrey Clifford were as brother and sister. It was through Geoffrey Clifford, in great measure, that the truth of these matters was ascertained. It may be mentioned in passing that today Geoffrey Clifford is editor-in-chief of one of the most famous newspapers in the world. Thus it was demonstrated that the bewildering likeness which existed between the two girls was the fruit of nothing but what some people would term a freak of nature, but what Mrs. Singleton preferred to describe as one of God's own miracles. Charles Singleton, who set the ball a-rolling, which resulted in such strange happenings, is dead, but his wife still lives. She is retired from active service, and resides in a cottage on one of the Earl's estates, where she is in possession of the modest all which her heart desires. Signor Bianchi also is still alive. He walks on two sticks, and his mental powers are not at all times so clear as they might be, but he still has a corner in the Earl's town-house, where still he plays upon the organ. There are some who assert that he still communicates with Maud. Indeed, already the foundations of a pretty ghost story are being reared. It is reported that someone has been heard singing to the signor's accompaniment, someone with a voice more beautiful than any human singer ever had. The secret hiding-place is hardly a secret any longer. It is known to many. The Earl and Countess use it as a retiring room, to which on more than one occasion they have introduced their friends. But it has been stated that when the Earl and Countess have been far away, someone has been heard passing in and out of the secret door, someone whose swishing skirts have betrayed her sex, and it is at these times that there has been that mysterious singing, that strange music, suggestive of another sphere. Reginald Fanshawe is no more. Death met him a few months after his brother's wedding, while travelling in India. His mother died of an apoplectic stroke only last year. Not one of the least singular features of the present situation consists in the fact that comparatively few people have any notion that the Countess of Staines is not Maud Dorincourt. She is actually so described in the peerages, but then those compilations are proverbially little else than collections of fables. The circumstances of Maud's death were kept as quiet as possible for family reasons. She was buried in the family vault in the presence of but 2 or 3 persons. So it comes about that only a handful of people know that she is dead. The world at large believes the evidence of its eyes, and declares she is alive. It knows nothing of the existence of Madeline Orme, though Madeline Orme is perhaps the most popular woman in English society, a true great lady, whose riches are as notorious as her benevolence, a leader in all good works, who is held in high honor for sufficient, righteous, and valid reasons the whole world over. And yet she is nothing but one of God's own miracles. End of chapter 24. End of The House of Mystery by Richard Marsh.